Get out! Get out! Margaret's shrill voice cut through the storm as she hurled another box of children's clothes into the rain. You think because you spread your legs for my brother, you deserve his money? Alicia clutched her 3-year-old triplets closer, her body shielding them from both the freezing downpour and the venom spilling from her dead husband's family. Little Marcus whimpered against her shoulder while Jade and Zoe buried their faces in her soaked sweater, their tiny bodies shaking. Please, Alicia whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. They're just babies. James wouldn't want. James is dead. Richard, James's older brother, stepped forward with the family lawyer trailing behind him like a nervous shadow. And you? You're nothing. A temporary mistake he made during his midlife crisis. The words hit harder than the rain. Alicia's knees nearly buckled as she watched them pile her life onto the sidewalk. Photo albums, the children's stuffed animals, even the rocking chair where James used to sing lullabies. Everything soggy, ruined, discarded. The house belongs to the family now, Margaret continued, her perfectly manicured fingers pointing at the mansion that had been Alicia's home for 6 years. Real family. Not some gold digging. I loved him. The words escaped before Alicia could stop them. Richard laughed, a cold, brutal sound. Love? You saw dollar signs. Well, congratulations. You get nothing. Not the house, not the business, not even his name on those bastard children. Thunder crashed overhead as if the sky itself was protesting the cruelty. Alicia's legs finally gave way, and she sank to her knees on the wet pavement, still holding her children. The family lawyer stepped forward, his umbrella creating a small circle of dryness around the legal documents in his hands. Mrs. Patterson, he said, his voice professionally detached. I'm required to inform you that all assets of the Patterson estate have been claimed by the rightful heirs. You have 1 hour to remove any remaining personal items, after which time, she can rot in the street where she belongs, Margaret finished, slamming the front door so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description. Alicia sat there in the rain, her children's cries mixing with her own silent tears. She thought about James, how he'd held her hand during those final weeks, whispering promises between his labored breaths. How he'd made her swear to be strong for their babies. How he'd smiled that mysterious smile when she'd worried about their future. Don't worry about money, baby, he'd said, his fingers tracing her face. I've made sure you and the kids will never want for anything. Trust me. But trust felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. The Patterson family had made their position clear from the moment James brought her home 6 years ago. She was the outsider, the young black woman who'd somehow captured their golden boy's heart. They'd tolerated her during family dinners, their smiles tight and conversations carefully neutral. But now, with James gone, the mask had finally slipped. A car splashed through a puddle nearby, soaking them further. Little Jade started crying harder, her small voice breaking Alicia's heart. Mommy, I'm cold. When are we going home? Home. The word felt foreign now. Alicia pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through her contacts. Her sister lived 3 states away in a 1-bedroom apartment. Her parents had passed 2 years ago. James's friends had all distanced themselves since the funeral, probably following the family's lead. She was about to call a cab when she noticed something odd. Her phone kept buzzing with notifications, emails from banks, investment firms, law offices she'd never heard of. Her finger hovered over one from Peterson, Klein & Associates, a name that sounded vaguely familiar. Dear Mrs. Patterson, as discussed in our previous correspondence regarding the transfer completion, we need to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience to finalize the documentation for the consolidated holdings. The transition period has concluded successfully, and all assets are now. The message cut off. Previous correspondence? Alicia had never contacted this firm. She tried to open the full email, but her phone's screen cracked further from the rain, making it impossible to read. Behind her, she could hear voices from inside the mansion. James's family already dividing up what they believed was theirs. Richard's booming laugh carried through the walls as he probably planned which car to drive first, which vacation home to visit. Margaret's voice grew excited as she discussed redecorating, erasing every trace of Alicia's existence. They had no idea what was coming. Alicia struggled to her feet, her children clinging to her like lifelines. The rain had stopped, but the damage was done. They were soaked, exhausted, and homeless. Yet something had shifted inside her during those moments on the cold pavement. The grief and shock were crystallizing into something harder, more focused. She thought about James's final words. "Trust me." As she walked away from the mansion, her phone buzzed again. This time, she managed to glimpse another email subject line before the screen went completely black. Patterson Holdings $250 million asset transfer confirmation. Behind her, the mansion's lights blazed warm and golden, filled with the laughter of people who thought they'd won. They were celebrating their victory, toasting James's memory while his wife and children wandered into the cold night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. But Alicia was no longer the broken woman who'd begged on their doorstep. She was James Patterson's widow, and she was about to discover exactly what that meant. The real game was just beginning. The Salvation Army shelter smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Alicia sat on the thin mattress, watching her triplets sleep under the scratchy blankets that charitable strangers had provided. Marcus sucked his thumb, a habit he'd outgrown months ago. Jade clutched a soggy teddy bear that had somehow survived the rain. Zoe whimpered in her sleep, calling for Daddy. Each soft cry felt like a knife twisting in Alicia's chest. First time, the voice belonged to Carmen, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands. She sat on the adjacent cot, her own meager possessions arranged in a neat pile beside her. Alicia nodded, not trusting her voice. "Kids make it harder," Carmen continued gently, "but also easier. They give you a reason to keep fighting when you want to give up." "I don't understand how this happened." The words tumbled out before Alicia could stop them. 6 months ago, we were planning Jade's birthday party at the country club. Now, she gestured helplessly at their surroundings. Women and children filled every available space, their quiet conversations creating a constant murmur of shared struggle. Some scrolled through phones, probably searching for jobs or affordable apartments. Others simply stared at the ceiling, overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control. "What did you do before?" Carmen asked. "I was a pediatric nurse. I worked at Children's Hospital until..." Alicia's voice trailed off. "Until James got sick and needed her at home. Until his family convinced him she should focus on being a wife and mother. Until she gave up everything that made her independent." The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years helping other people's children heal, only to find herself unable to protect her own from this nightmare. Her phone, now held together with medical tape Carmen had provided, buzzed against the mattress. The screen flickered to life just long enough for her to see another email notification before dying completely. She tried charging it, but the shelter's outlets were limited and the phone seemed damaged beyond repair. "Mommy," Marcus stirred, his brown eyes opening slowly. "Are we going home tomorrow?" The question shattered what little composure Alicia had left. She pulled him close, breathing in his familiar scent of baby shampoo and innocence. "We're going to find a new home, baby. A better one." It was a lie, but what else could she say? That his aunts and uncles had thrown them away like garbage? That the man they'd called Papa James had left them with nothing but memories and heartbreak? Carmen's phone rang, its cheerful ringtone jarring in the somber atmosphere. "Sorry," she whispered, moving toward the hallway to take the call. But Alicia caught fragments of the conversation that made her blood run cold. "Yes, she's here with the 3 kids. No, she has no idea. Are you sure this is the right approach? The woman just lost her husband." Carmen returned a few minutes later, her expression carefully neutral. "Everything okay?" Alicia asked, though something in her gut was already screaming warnings. "Just my social worker checking in." Carmen's smile felt forced. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." But sleep wouldn't come. Alicia lay awake, replaying the conversation she'd overheard. Carmen had been asking about her specifically. Someone was asking about her and the children. Her mind raced through possibilities. Child services, private investigators, maybe even the Patterson family ensuring she couldn't cause them any future problems. At 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and made her way to the shelter's common area. A few other insomniacs sat scattered around worn couches, nursing cups of weak coffee and their own private demons. Alicia found a corner where she could think without interruption. 6 years ago, she'd been Dr. Elena Rodriguez's best nurse, respected by colleagues and beloved by patients. Then she'd met James Patterson at a hospital fundraiser, and her entire world had shifted. He'd been charming, successful, and completely smitten with her from their first dance. The whirlwind romance had led to marriage within a year, followed quickly by the surprise pregnancy that gave them their triplets. The Patterson family's reaction had been immediate and brutal, though they'd hidden it behind polite society masks. Margaret had made comments about breeding and appropriate matches. Richard had questioned whether the children were really James's, despite their obvious resemblance to their father. The patriarch, James's father Harrison, had simply pretended Alicia didn't exist at family gatherings. But James had been different. He defended her fiercely, eventually cutting contact with family members who couldn't accept his choice. When his father died 2 years ago, James had inherited the bulk of the family fortune, much to his siblings' fury. He'd used that power to protect Alicia and their children from the worst of the family's venom. Until cancer took him away. Mrs. Patterson? Alicia looked up to find a man in an expensive suit standing beside her chair. He was tall, distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention. Other shelter residents glanced over curiously before returning to their own concerns. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late. My name is David Chun from Peterson, Klein & Associates. I've been trying to reach you for several days." The law firm from the emails. Alicia's heart raced as pieces started clicking into place. "How did you find me here?" "We've been monitoring the situation since your husband's death. We had someone keeping an eye on things, ensuring you were safe." His gaze shifted toward the sleeping area where Carmen's cot was located. "I apologize for the indirect approach, but given the circumstances, we felt discretion was necessary." Carmen, the woman who'd befriended her, offered comfort and advice. She'd been reporting back to lawyers. The betrayal stung almost as much as the family's cruelty. In this place where trust was the only currency that mattered, even that had been stripped away. "I don't understand. What circumstances? What situation?" David glanced around the crowded common area, where their conversation was drawing more attention. "Perhaps we could speak privately? I have a car waiting outside. We can discuss your husband's final arrangements. I can't leave my children." "Of course. My associate can stay with them. This won't take long, but it's crucial that we speak tonight." Everything about this felt wrong, but Alicia was too exhausted and confused to resist. She followed David outside into the pre-dawn darkness, where a black sedan waited at the curb. The interior was warm and luxurious, leather seats, soft lighting, the faint scent of expensive cologne. "Mrs. Patterson, your husband was a remarkable man. Brilliant, strategic, and absolutely devoted to you and your children." David opened a briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. He spent the last year of his life preparing for this moment. What moment? The moment when his family would try to destroy you. The words hung in the air like a challenge. David's expression was grave as he continued. James knew his family's true nature better than anyone. He'd watched them circle like vultures whenever family money was involved. When he received his diagnosis, he didn't just write a will. He orchestrated a complete financial restructuring. Alicia's hands trembled as she accepted the folder. Inside were documents bearing official seals, bank letterheads, and legal language that made her head spin. But some phrases jumped out clearly. Sole beneficiary, irrevocable trust, transferred assets totaling $250 million, David said quietly. Everything James owned, the businesses, properties, investments, even the mansion where his family threw you out tonight, it all belongs to you. It has belonged to you for the past 8 months. The number was so large it felt meaningless. Like monopoly money or a fantasy. Alicia stared at the documents, trying to process what she was hearing. "That's impossible," the family lawyer said. "The family lawyer knows nothing about this. James used our firm specifically because we had no prior relationship with the Patterson family. He wanted to ensure his wishes couldn't be corrupted or contested." A terrible thought occurred to her. If this is true, why didn't you stop them? Why did you let them throw us out? David's expression softened with something that might have been sympathy. Because James's final instruction was very specific. He wanted his family to reveal their true nature first. He wanted you to see exactly who they were when they thought they held all the power. He wanted me to suffer. He wanted you to be strong. James believed, and I think he was right, that you needed to experience their cruelty firsthand before you could truly understand what you were dealing with. He didn't want you to spend the rest of your life wondering if they might change, if reconciliation was possible. The car felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Alicia thought about her children sleeping on charity mattresses, about the humiliation of begging for basic shelter, about the looks of pity from strangers who saw her as just another statistic. Now what? Now you decide what kind of person you want to be. You have the power to reclaim everything they stole from you. You can walk back into that mansion tomorrow and evict them legally. You can press charges for theft, harassment, and emotional distress. You can destroy them financially within a matter of days. David paused, studying her face carefully. Or you can walk away. Take your inheritance, move somewhere new, and never think about the Patterson family again. The choice felt overwhelming. 6 hours ago, she'd been homeless and helpless. Now she apparently had more money than she could spend in several lifetimes. The shift was too dramatic, too sudden. I need time to think. Of course. But Mrs. Patterson, there's one more thing you should know. David's tone grew darker. The family has already begun liquidating assets they believe they've inherited. They're making deals, selling properties, emptying accounts. Every day you wait is another day they steal from your children's future. Through the car window, Alicia could see the shelter's entrance. Inside, her babies were sleeping under donated blankets, trusting their mother to somehow make everything okay. They didn't understand why their comfortable life had suddenly disappeared, why their extended family had turned against them with such vicious cruelty. But now she understood something they didn't. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time she held all the cards. The next morning, Alicia stood outside Patterson Industries, watching Richard stride through the glass lobby like he owned the world. Which, according to him, he now did. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was looking at her own building, watching a man steal from her while believing himself to be generous. She'd left the children at the shelter with Carmen, despite knowing the woman was reporting her movements. Some betrayals you had to accept strategically. The phone David had given her buzzed with updates from his legal team, each message more infuriating than the last. Richard Patterson just signed a deal selling Patterson Medical Supply chain to Vanguard Corporation, sale price $40 million. Closing date, Friday. Margaret Patterson liquidated the children's college funds. $2.3 million transferred to her personal account this morning. Family attorney filed paperwork to sell the Patterson estate. Listing goes live in 48 hours. They weren't just stealing her inheritance, they were destroying James's legacy, piece by piece. The medical supply company had been his first business, built from nothing when he was barely 25. He'd planned to expand it into a foundation serving underprivileged communities. Now Richard was selling it to the highest bidder like it meant nothing. Mrs. Patterson? She turned to find a man approaching from the parking garage. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark skin and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore jeans and a leather jacket, nothing like the lawyers and business associates she'd been meeting. I'm Marcus Webb. I worked with your husband on several projects. He extended his hand, and she noticed calloused fingers that spoke of real work, not just boardroom handshakes. I'm sorry for your loss. James was a good man. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. What kind of projects? Community development. Housing initiatives for low-income families. James never publicized it, but he'd been quietly funding neighborhood revitalization for years. Marcus's expression darkened as he glanced toward the Patterson Industries building. Until yesterday, when his brother canceled every single project. The words hit her like a physical blow. How many families? 347 units under construction. 2 completed community centers about to open. A free clinic that was scheduled to start serving patients next month. Marcus's jaw tightened. Richard pulled funding for all of it. Said the company needed to focus on profitable ventures now that James was gone. Alicia felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. This wasn't just about money anymore. The Patterson family's greed was destroying the dreams of hundreds of families who'd been counting on James's vision. Children who would now grow up in substandard housing. Sick people who would continue to go without medical care. Did you try to stop him? I'm just a construction foreman. Richard made it clear that my concerns weren't welcome. Marcus studied her face carefully. But I heard rumors that you might have more influence than people realize. David had warned her about this. Word was already spreading through James's network that something wasn't quite right about the inheritance situation. People who'd worked closely with her husband were starting to ask questions. What would you do if you could stop Richard? The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of workers leaving the building with cardboard boxes. Probably the community development team being laid off. I'd make sure those families got the homes James promised them. I'd finish what he started, exactly the way he would have wanted. He met her eyes directly. But I'd also make sure that anyone who tried to profit from his death understood the real cost of their greed. There was something in his tone that made her pulse quicken. This wasn't just about business for him, it was personal. She found herself wondering about his story, what had brought him into James's orbit, why he cared so deeply about projects that most contractors would see as charity work. "Walk with me," she said impulsively. They strolled through the business district, past coffee shops filled with morning commuters and office buildings buzzing with activity. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that a war was brewing in their midst. "Tell me about the families," Alicia said. "The ones who'll lose their homes." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos that made her heart ache. A young mother holding a toddler in front of a half-built house, beaming with pride. An elderly man showing off the accessible bathroom being installed for his disabled wife. Children playing in the foundation of what would have been their first real bedrooms. This is Maria Santos. Single mom, works 2 jobs, finally saved enough for the down payment on a Patterson community home. Construction was supposed to finish next month. He swiped to the next photo. This is Robert Chin, no relation to your lawyer. Vietnam veteran, lost his leg in service. James personally designed the modifications for his unit. Each photo felt like a weight added to her shoulders. These weren't statistics or business decisions. They were real people whose lives James had tried to improve. People who were now collateral damage in his family's money grab. "There's something else," Marcus continued, his voice dropping lower. "Richard isn't just canceling the projects. He's selling the land to developers who plan to build luxury condos. He'll make triple the profit James would have made helping low-income families." The cold feeling in Alicia's chest was spreading, crystallizing into something harder and more focused. She thought about her children sleeping on charity mattresses while Richard planned to profit from destroying their father's compassionate legacy. "How long do we have?" The question surprised them both. She'd said "we" without thinking, including Marcus in whatever she was planning. But looking at his face, she realized he'd been hoping for exactly that. "The first demolition is scheduled for Monday. Richard wants to clear the existing structures fast, before anyone can organize opposition." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Mrs. Patterson, I don't know what resources you have available, but if you're serious about fighting this..." "I'm serious." The words came out with more conviction than she'd felt about anything since James's death. Standing there in the morning sunlight, surrounded by the city James had loved and tried to improve, she felt something shift inside her. The grief and confusion of the past week were transforming into purpose. "Good. Because there's something you should see before you make any final decisions." 20 minutes later, they stood in front of a modest house in Eastgate neighborhood, one of the communities James had been trying to revitalize. The front yard was carefully maintained, with a small garden and children's toys scattered on the porch. Through the window, Alicia could see a woman helping 3 young children with what looked like homework. "That's Denise Williams. Her husband died in Afghanistan 2 years ago. She's been working as a night shift nurse to support her kids while going to school during the day to become a nurse practitioner." Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. James was going to build her family a house with space for her to run a small clinic. Free healthcare for families who can't afford it otherwise. Alicia watched the woman inside, seeing herself in the careful way she managed her children's needs, the exhaustion in her movements that spoke of carrying too much responsibility alone. How many nights had Alicia looked exactly like that during James's illness? Richard's development plans call for this entire block to be demolished. Denise and her kids will have nowhere to go. The parallel was too obvious to ignore. Another family about to be thrown out into the cold, their dreams shattered by Patterson family greed. But this time, Alicia had the power to stop it. Her phone buzzed with another update from David's team. Margaret Patterson just purchased a $3.2 million vacation home in the Hamptons using liquidated inheritance funds. While families like Denise Williams faced homelessness, Margaret was buying beach houses with money that belonged to Alicia's children. "I need to make a call," she said quietly. Marcus stepped away to give her privacy, but she could feel him watching as she dialed David's number. "I want to take back everything they stole," she said when he answered. "All of it. But I don't want them to see it coming." "Are you certain?" "Once we begin the legal process, there's no going back. The Patterson family will become your enemies permanently." Alicia looked at the house where Denise Williams was building a life for her children despite impossible odds. She thought about Maria Santos and Robert Chin and all the other families counting on James's promises. She thought about her own children, who deserved to inherit their father's compassion along with his fortune. They became my enemies the moment they threw my babies into the rain, she said. Now I want to teach them what real consequences look like. Understood. How do you want to proceed? Quietly. Strategically. I want them to keep thinking they've won right up until the moment their world collapses. She paused, feeling the weight of the decision settling over her. And I want to finish every single project they canceled. Every house, every clinic, every dream they tried to destroy. When she hung up, Marcus was standing closer, his expression unreadable. You're really going to do this? I'm really going to do this. Good. A slow smile spread across his face. Because I was hoping you'd say that. James always said you were stronger than you knew. You talked to James about me? More than you might think. He worried about leaving you to face his family alone. But he also believed you had everything inside you to not just survive them, but to show them exactly who they were dealing with. The words carried an intimacy that surprised her, suggesting conversations between Marcus and James that went deeper than construction contracts. She found herself wondering what else her husband had shared, what other preparations he'd made for this moment. There's something else, Marcus said, his tone shifting to something more personal. I want to help. Not just with the construction projects, with all of it. The Patterson family thinks they can bully their way through this because they've never faced real opposition. Why? Why would you risk getting involved in a family war? His answer came without hesitation. Because James was my friend. Because those families deserve the homes he promised them. And because watching you stand up to Richard Patterson yesterday was the first time in weeks that I believed justice might actually exist. The air between them seemed to thicken with possibility. This was dangerous territory. Personal feelings getting tangled with business decisions, attraction complicating an already complex situation. But looking into Marcus's eyes, Alicia felt something she hadn't experienced since James's death. The sense that she wasn't facing this fight alone. This is going to get ugly, she warned. I'm counting on it. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Legal team assembled. Ready to begin asset recovery proceedings on your command. Another text followed immediately. Warning. Patterson family planning major announcement tomorrow. Recommend we move fast. The game was accelerating whether she was ready or not. Richard and Margaret were making their moves, liquidating assets and selling off James's legacy piece by piece. But they had no idea they were actually stealing from the very woman they'd tried to destroy. Marcus, how quickly can you get the construction teams back together? Give me 48 hours and I'll have crews ready to restart every project Richard canceled. Do it. And make sure everyone knows, this time, we're building something that can't be torn down. As they walked back toward downtown, Alicia felt the last of her hesitation burning away. The Patterson family had made their choice when they threw her children into the rain. Now she would show them the consequences of underestimating a mother's love and a dead man's final gift. The war was about to begin, and this time she intended to win. By Thursday morning, the Patterson family was drunk on their own success. Richard strutted through downtown like a conquering general, closing deals and making plans for his expanded empire. Margaret had already hired an interior designer to modernize the mansion, gleefully erasing every trace of Alicia's 6-year presence. Even Harrison Jr., the youngest brother who'd always seemed the most reasonable, was busy liquidating James's art collection. They had no idea their world was already crumbling. Patterson Medical Supply sale just fell through. David's voice crackled through Alicia's new phone as she sat in the back of his law firm's conference room. Vanguard Corp discovered some irregularities in the ownership documents. Alicia allowed herself a small smile. What kind of irregularities? The kind that happen when someone tries to sell a company they don't actually own. David's tone carried deep satisfaction. Richard is currently in a screaming match with his lawyers, trying to understand how the sale could be blocked. And the vacation home Margaret bought? The bank is initiating foreclosure proceedings. Turns out the account she used contained funds that were illegally transferred. They're freezing all her assets pending investigation. The revenge was surgical, precise. Each move designed to inflict maximum damage while leaving the Patterson family confused about what was happening. They knew something was wrong, but they couldn't see the hand orchestrating their destruction. What about the mansion? That's where things get interesting. David leaned forward, his expression growing serious. They can't sell it because the deed is in your name, but they also don't know that yet. The listing has generated significant interest. Several potential buyers are scheduled to tour the property tomorrow. Alicia felt a dark satisfaction at the thought of Margaret giving tours of a house she didn't own, taking deposits on a sale that would never happen. Let them waste their time. When do we reveal the truth? Soon. But first, we need to address a complication. The word sent ice through her veins. What complication? Carmen wasn't just reporting your movements to us. She was also feeding information to someone else, specifically to a private investigator the Patterson family hired to monitor you. The betrayal cut deeper than expected. Even knowing Carmen was compromised, Alicia had started to trust her, to see her as an ally in the shelter's harsh environment. Now she realized every conversation, every vulnerable moment, had been documented and reported to her enemies. How much do they know? Too much. They know you've been meeting with lawyers. They know about Marcus Webb's involvement. They suspect you're planning some kind of legal challenge. David's expression darkened. And they're preparing to eliminate you as a threat. The words hung in the air like a warning bell. Eliminate how? Child Protective Services received an anonymous tip yesterday. Someone reported that you're housing your children in unsafe conditions, that you're emotionally unstable following your husband's death, that you're associating with dangerous individuals who might be influencing your decision-making. Alicia's blood turned to ice water. They're trying to take my children. The investigation is already underway. CPS will be visiting the shelter this afternoon to interview you and evaluate the children's living situation. This was beyond warfare. This was an attack on the most sacred thing in her life. The Patterson family wasn't content with stealing her inheritance. They wanted to destroy her completely, to take away the only thing that mattered more than money or revenge. We need to accelerate everything, she said, her voice deadly calm. No more waiting, no more strategic delays. I want them destroyed by tomorrow. Alicia, if we move too fast. If we don't move fast enough, I lose my children. That's not acceptable. David studied her face, recognizing the shift from strategic planning to maternal fury. Understood. I'll have the papers filed within the hour. But you need to understand, once we reveal your ownership of the Patterson assets, they'll know you've been orchestrating their downfall. The war becomes visible. Good. I'm tired of fighting from the shadows. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Meet me at the Eastgate site. Something you need to see. Urgent. I have to go, she told David. Whatever happens with CPS this afternoon, buy me time. My children are not going to pay for their grandparents' cruelty. The drive to Eastgate took 20 minutes through increasingly heavy traffic. As she navigated the congested streets, Alicia's mind raced through contingency plans. If CPS tried to remove her children from the shelter, where could they go? David's firm could probably arrange temporary housing, but that would mean living under legal scrutiny while the custody battle played out. The Patterson family had chosen the perfect weapon, her love for her children. They knew she would sacrifice anything, including her revenge, to protect Marcus, Jade, and Zoe. It was a masterful psychological attack, designed to force her into submission just as victory was within reach. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd underestimated how far a mother would go when cornered. She found Marcus at the construction site where Denise Williams's house should have been rising. Instead, she discovered a scene of calculated destruction. The foundation had been filled with concrete, making it impossible to resume construction without massive additional costs. Building materials were scattered and damaged, as if someone had deliberately sabotaged the project. This happened last night, Marcus said, his face grim. Every single site James was developing. Professional vandalism designed to make restarting construction financially prohibitive. Alicia walked through the destruction, seeing Richard's hand in every detail. This wasn't random violence. It was strategic elimination of his brother's legacy, ensuring that even if the legal challenges succeeded, the community projects would be too expensive to salvage. How much would it cost to fix this? More than most people would be willing to spend. Richard's sending a message. Fight us, and we'll destroy everything you're trying to protect. But as Alicia surveyed the damage, she felt something unexpected. Relief. The Patterson family had finally shown their true nature completely. No more pretense of family loyalty or grief over James's death. This was pure, calculated cruelty designed to hurt innocent families who'd committed no crime beyond believing in James's vision. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Anything. My husband's family is going to try to use my relationship with you against me. They'll claim I'm being manipulated, that I'm making emotional decisions instead of rational ones." She took a deep breath. "Are you prepared for them to tear apart your life looking for ammunition to use against me?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications about the growing attraction neither had fully acknowledged. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from the destroyed construction site to her face. "Alicia, there's something I haven't told you about my relationship with James." Her heart rate spiked. Another secret, another revelation that would change everything she thought she understood. "He didn't just hire me for construction projects. He hired me to watch over you and the children if something happened to him." Marcus's voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I've been living 2 blocks from your house for the past 8 months, making sure you were safe." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You've been spying on me? I've been protecting you. There's a difference." "Is there? How do I know what's real and what's just another part of James's elaborate plan?" The accusation came out harsher than she intended, but the sense of betrayal was overwhelming. First Carmen, now Marcus. How many people in her life were playing roles instead of being genuine? Because if this was just about following James's instructions, I would have revealed myself when his family threw you out. I would have stopped them immediately. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to something more intimate. "I'm here because watching you fight for your children, seeing you stand up to people who thought they could break you, it made me realize that James was right about more than just your strength." "Right about what?" "That you're the kind of woman worth risking everything for." The words created a charged silence between them. Standing in the wreckage of her husband's dreams, facing a custody battle that could destroy her family, Alicia felt the dangerous pull of connection with a man who represented both protection and complication. Her phone rang, interrupting the moment. David's name flashed on the screen. "CPS is at the shelter now," he said without preamble. "Carmen's been helping them build a case against you. They have photos of the children's living conditions, recordings of conversations where you discussed your emotional instability, witness statements about your erratic behavior." "What kind of witness statements?" "Margaret Patterson apparently visited the shelter yesterday. She told CPS she was concerned about her beloved nieces and nephew being raised by someone who was clearly having a mental breakdown following her husband's death." The audacity was breathtaking. Margaret, who'd thrown 3-year-olds into freezing rain, was now posing as a concerned family member worried about their welfare. "Where are my children now?" "Safe for the moment. But CPS wants to interview you immediately. They're talking about emergency removal if they don't like what they see." Alicia closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in from every direction. The Patterson family had orchestrated this perfectly. Attack her credibility, destroy James's projects, and threaten her children all simultaneously. Each crisis reinforced the others, creating a pressure cooker designed to force her into total surrender. "David, file the papers. All of them. I want every Patterson asset frozen by end of business today." "Alicia, if you're not there when CPS, they'll use my absence against me either way. At least this way, the Patterson family will understand exactly who they're dealing with." She hung up and turned to Marcus, who'd been listening to her side of the conversation with growing alarm. "This is about to get very dangerous," she warned. "If you want to walk away, now's the time." "I'm not walking away. They'll destroy you to get to me." "Let them try." Marcus moved closer, and she could see the determination in his eyes. "James asked me to protect you and the children. But this isn't about James anymore. This is about you, and what you deserve, and making sure those kids grow up knowing their mother never backed down from a fight." The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with unspoken possibilities and shared danger. For a moment, standing in the ruins of one dream while fighting to build another, Alicia felt the temptation to lean into his strength, to accept the partnership he was offering on every level. But her phone was already buzzing with new crisis updates, and somewhere across town, her children were being interrogated by strangers who'd been fed lies about their mother's fitness to care for them. "We need to go," she said, though neither of them moved immediately. "Together?" The question carried weight beyond logistics. He was asking if she trusted him, if she was ready to let someone else into the war she'd been fighting alone. Together. As they walked back to their cars, Alicia felt the momentum of the day shifting into something unstoppable. The Patterson family had escalated beyond financial warfare into attacks on her children and her sanity. But they'd also revealed the depths of their cruelty in ways that even sympathetic observers couldn't ignore. The gloves were coming off on both sides. By tonight, everyone would know exactly where the battle lines were drawn. The Patterson family would discover they'd been fighting a war they'd already lost. And Alicia would learn whether the price of victory was worth the cost of everything she held dear. The final confrontation was hours away, and there would be no going back. The East Side Community Shelter had transformed into a battlefield by the time Alicia arrived. 3 CPS vehicles crowded the parking lot alongside a news van. Because of course the Patterson family had tipped off the media about the unstable widow who was allegedly endangering her children. Alicia could see reporters setting up cameras, ready to broadcast her humiliation to the entire city. "Mrs. Patterson?" A woman in a crisp business suit approached as Alicia stepped out of her car. "I'm Sandra Mitchell from Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you immediately about your children's welfare." The woman's tone carried the authority of someone accustomed to compliance, but Alicia detected something else underneath: uncertainty, maybe even discomfort. Behind Sandra stood 2 other officials and a man in an expensive suit who looked distinctly out of place in the shelter's parking lot. "That's Robert Fairfield," Marcus murmured, close enough to her ear that only she could hear. "The Patterson family's primary attorney. This isn't a routine CPS investigation, it's a coordinated attack." Alicia forced herself to remain calm as they walked toward the shelter entrance. Inside, she could see her children through the windows, sitting in the common area with Carmen while strangers took notes and photos. Marcus was barely walking, Jade was crying silently, and Zoe was clinging to her stuffed animal like a lifeline. The sight of her babies being treated like evidence in a case file ignited something primal in her chest. But she'd learned enough about warfare in the past week to know that losing control now would hand her enemies exactly what they wanted. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "I'm happy to cooperate with your investigation, but I'd like to understand why you're conducting interviews without my presence and why there's a Patterson family attorney involved in what should be an independent child welfare assessment." Sandra's professional mask slipped slightly. "Mr. Fairfield is here as a concerned family member's representative." Mrs. Margaret Patterson expressed deep concern about her nieces and nephews' living conditions. "Mrs. Margaret Patterson threw these children into freezing rain 4 days ago," Alicia interrupted. "She called them bastards and told me they should rot in the street. Is that the kind of family concern you typically rely on for child welfare decisions?" Robert Fairfield stepped forward smoothly. "Mrs. Patterson, we understand you're going through a difficult time following your husband's death. The family is prepared to offer support, including temporary guardianship arrangements that would ensure the children's stability while you receive the help you need." The words were carefully crafted to sound compassionate while setting a trap. Accept their help, and she'd be admitting she was unfit to care for her own children. Refuse, and they'd claim she was putting pride above her children's welfare. "What kind of help are you suggesting I need?" she asked. "Grief counseling, financial planning assistance, perhaps a residential treatment program where you could focus on healing while the children are safely cared for by loving family members." Marcus shifted beside her, and she could feel his tension like a live wire. Through the windows, she watched Carmen pointing at documents while speaking to another CPS worker. Every gesture felt like another nail in her coffin. "Ms. Mitchell," Alicia said, turning back to the CPS supervisor, "I'd like to request that this evaluation be conducted by a different caseworker, one without prior contact with the Patterson family or their representatives." "That's not how this works, Mrs. Patterson. We respond to concerns from any legitimate source, including family members. Even family members who have financial incentives for removing me from my children's lives." Sandra's expression grew confused. "I'm not sure what you mean." This was the moment. Alicia could continue playing defense, trying to prove her fitness as a mother while her enemies controlled the narrative. Or she could go on offense and reveal exactly what was really happening. Her phone buzzed with a text from David, papers filed. "All Patterson assets frozen effective immediately. Financial fraud investigation launched. You are now officially the wealthiest person in this parking lot. Ms. Mitchell, has anyone told you that I'm the sole heir to a $250 million fortune? That every asset the Patterson family believes they've inherited actually belongs to me legally? That this sudden concern for my children's welfare coincides remarkably with their discovery that they can't access money they thought was theirs?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sandra's confusion was evident, while Robert Fairfield's carefully controlled expression cracked slightly. "That's impossible," Fairfield said. "The will was read publicly. The assets. The assets were transferred to my name 8 months ago, long before my husband's death. Everything you've been selling, every account you've been accessing, every property you've been planning to liquidate, it all belongs to me." Alicia pulled out her phone and called David on speaker. "David, could you please confirm my legal status for Ms. Mitchell?" "Certainly. As of 30 minutes ago, Alicia Patterson is the verified legal owner of Patterson Industries, all related subsidiaries, the Patterson estate, and associated investment portfolios totaling approximately $250 million. The Patterson family has been accessing these assets illegally, and federal fraud charges are currently being prepared." Sandra Mitchell's face had gone pale. "Mr. Fairfield, is this accurate?" But Robert Fairfield was already backing away, his phone pressed to his ear. Alicia caught fragments of his urgent conversation. "Need emergency meeting. Situation has changed. Recommend immediate withdrawal." "Ms. Mitchell," Alicia continued, her confidence growing with each word, "I think you'll find that the family members expressing concern about my children's welfare are currently under investigation for financial fraud, theft, and conspiracy. I'd be happy to provide housing that's significantly more appropriate than this shelter, now that I have access to my legal assets." The CPS supervisor looked between Alicia and the retreating attorney, clearly trying to process this dramatic shift in the situation's dynamics. "Mrs. Patterson, if what you're saying is true, why are you staying in a homeless shelter?" "Because until today, I was allowing my husband's family to reveal their true nature before taking legal action. My husband predicted they would try to destroy me and my children if they thought they could get away with it. I wanted to document their behavior before responding." Through the shelter windows, Alicia could see Carmen standing abruptly, her conversation with the CPS worker ending as she received what appeared to be an urgent phone call. The woman's face shifted from cooperative concern to barely controlled panic as she listened to whoever was on the other end. Marcus moved closer to Alicia, his voice low. "Carmen's getting new instructions. This is about to get more complicated." He was right. Carmen disconnected her call and immediately approached one of the CPS workers, speaking rapidly and gesturing toward the children. Whatever she was saying was causing alarm. Alicia could see the worker's expression growing increasingly concerned. "Ms. Mitchell," Carmen called out, approaching their group. "I need to speak with you privately. There's been a development regarding the children's safety." "What kind of development?" Alicia demanded. Carmen's eyes were bright with malicious satisfaction. "I've been documenting concerning behavior patterns over the past several days. Mrs. Patterson has been meeting with individuals of questionable character, making threats against her husband's family, and displaying increasingly erratic emotional responses. This morning, she was observed at a construction site engaged in what appeared to be planning some kind of retaliatory action. The lies were skillfully constructed, mixing enough truth to sound credible while twisting everything into evidence of instability. Yes, she'd been meeting with lawyers and Marcus. Yes, she'd been planning action against the Patterson family. But Carmen was presenting these reasonable responses to theft and cruelty as signs of mental breakdown. Furthermore, Carmen continued, the children have been showing signs of distress that suggest their mother's emotional state is affecting them negatively. They've been asking repeatedly when they can go home, expressing confusion about why their family has abandoned them, and displaying regression behaviors consistent with trauma. Each word felt like a knife twisting in Alicia's chest. Of course her children were showing signs of distress. They'd been thrown out of their home, separated from everything familiar, and forced to live in a shelter while their mother fought battles they couldn't understand. "Ms. Mitchell," Carmen said, her voice carrying false compassion, "I believe these children need immediate protection from further psychological damage. Their mother's pursuit of what she calls justice is clearly taking precedence over their emotional well-being." Sandra Mitchell was taking notes, her expression growing more concerned with each allegation. The presence of media outside would make this case high-profile, putting additional pressure on CPS to err on the side of caution, which meant removing the children first and asking questions later. "Mrs. Patterson," Sandra said slowly, "these are serious allegations. Even if your financial situation has improved, the primary concern is your children's immediate emotional and psychological safety." "My children's psychological safety was threatened when their relatives threw them into the rain and called them bastards," Alicia replied. Everything I've done since then has been focused on protecting them and ensuring they inherit the legacy their father intended for them. But she could see the tide turning against her. Carmen's performance was masterful. She'd positioned herself as a concerned observer reluctantly sharing difficult truths, while painting Alicia as an unstable woman prioritizing revenge over her children's welfare. Marcus stepped forward. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Marcus Webb. I've been working with Mrs. Patterson on community development projects her husband initiated before his death. I can provide character references and documentation of her rational, compassionate decision-making throughout this crisis." Carmen immediately pounced on his involvement. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Mrs. Patterson has become emotionally involved with this man after knowing him for less than a week. She's making impulsive decisions about her children's lives based on a relationship that developed during an extremely vulnerable period." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Alicia felt the careful control she'd maintained starting to crack under the pressure of multiple attacks. They were weaponizing her grief, her strength, her attempts to protect her children, even her growing feelings for Marcus. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, fighting to keep her voice level, "I'd like to request immediate DNA testing to establish that I am these children's biological mother and that no one else has legal standing to make decisions about their welfare." "That's not the issue here, Mrs. Patterson. The issue is whether you're currently capable of providing appropriate care. Then I'd like to request a psychological evaluation by an independent professional, not someone influenced by family members who have financial incentives for discrediting me." Sandra hesitated, clearly recognizing the reasonableness of the request. But Carmen wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," she said, pulling out her phone. "I recorded several conversations where Mrs. Patterson discussed her plans for revenge against her husband's family. She specifically mentioned wanting to destroy them and make them pay for their treatment of her." Alicia's blood ran cold. Those conversations had taken place during her darkest moments, when grief and rage had made her say things she wouldn't normally express. Taken out of context, they would sound like the threats of an unstable person rather than the natural anger of someone who'd been victimized. "Play the recordings," she said, calling Carmen's bluff. But Carmen's smile was triumphant as she pressed play. Alicia's own voice filled the parking lot, distorted by poor audio quality, but still recognizable. "I want them to suffer the way they made my children suffer. I want them to lose everything they think they deserve. I want them to understand what real consequences look like." The words sounded worse than she remembered, particularly without the context of what the Patterson family had done to provoke them. Sandra Mitchell's expression grew increasingly concerned as the recording continued. "They threw my babies into the rain, and they're going to pay for that. Every single one of them is going to learn what it feels like to have their world destroyed." "Mrs. Patterson," Sandra said when the recording ended, "this suggests a level of preoccupation with revenge that raises serious concerns about your children's emotional environment." Alicia felt the trap closing around her. Every strength was being reframed as a weakness, every reasonable response twisted into evidence of instability. The Patterson family had orchestrated this perfectly, using her own words and actions against her while positioning themselves as concerned relatives. "Ms. Mitchell," Marcus said, his voice carrying newfound urgency, "there's something you need to know about the broader situation here." But before he could continue, a commotion erupted near the shelter entrance. 3 police cars had arrived, followed by another news van, and what appeared to be federal agents in dark suits. David Chun emerged from one of the vehicles, his expression grim as he approached their group. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm going to need you to suspend this investigation immediately." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that this entire situation is part of an ongoing federal investigation into financial fraud, conspiracy, and potentially witness intimidation." David's tone carried the weight of serious legal authority. "The individuals who initiated this CPS investigation are currently being arrested for multiple felonies." As if summoned by his words, federal agents were already moving toward the news crews and the remaining Patterson family representatives. Robert Fairfield was being escorted to one of the police cars, his phone confiscated, and his rights being read. "Furthermore," David continued, "we have evidence that at least one individual involved in this investigation has been providing false information in exchange for payment from parties with direct financial interests in the outcome." All eyes turned to Carmen, whose confident expression was rapidly crumbling into panic. She started backing toward the shelter entrance, but federal agents were already moving to intercept her. Carmen Rodriguez, one of the agents, called out. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and providing false statements in a child welfare investigation. The next few minutes passed in a blur of handcuffs, Miranda rights, and media chaos. Carmen was led away in custody while Sandra Mitchell stood frozen. Clearly trying to process the complete reversal of the situation she thought she understood. Ms. Mitchell, David said once the immediate arrests were complete. Mrs. Patterson is the victim of an elaborate scheme to steal her inheritance and gain custody of her children through fraudulent means. Every allegation made against her today came from individuals who are now facing federal charges. But the recordings were made by a paid informant who deliberately provoked emotional responses and then edited them to sound as damaging as possible. We have the full, unedited conversations, which tell a very different story. Alicia felt relief flooding through her, but it was tempered by rage at how close she'd come to losing her children based on lies and manipulation. The Patterson family hadn't just tried to steal her money. They'd weaponized the child welfare system against her. Where are my children now? She asked. Inside with a victim's advocate, Sandra replied, her professional composure clearly shaken. Mrs. Patterson, I owe you an apology. We were provided with information that appeared credible from sources who seemed legitimate. You were manipulated by people who were willing to destroy 3 innocent children to access money that was never theirs, Alicia said. I hope you'll remember this case the next time wealthy families try to use your system to settle their personal vendettas. As the CPS vehicles departed and the federal agents finished their work, Alicia finally allowed herself to breathe. But the relief was short-lived as Marcus touched her arm, his expression troubled. Alicia, there's something else. Something I learned while you were dealing with the CPS situation. What now? Richard and Margaret fled the city this morning. They liquidated whatever cash they could access and disappeared before the federal charges could be filed. But before they left, they made one final move. David overheard and approached them, his expression grim. The children's college funds. The ones Margaret emptied yesterday. That money wasn't transferred to her personal account. It was wire transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. How much? $2.3 million. Money that was specifically designated for Marcus, Jade, and Zoe's education and future needs. The betrayal cut deeper than anything else they'd done. Richard and Margaret hadn't just stolen from Alicia. They'd stolen from their own nieces and nephew, taking money that James had carefully saved for his children's futures. Can we get it back? Eventually, probably. But it will take months, maybe years of international legal proceedings. And that's assuming we can locate them and prove they don't have legitimate claim to those funds. Alicia felt exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. She'd won the immediate battle. Her children were safe, the Patterson family's schemes had been exposed, and her inheritance was secure. But the war was far from over, and the cost was becoming clearer with each revelation. There's more, Marcus said quietly. Before they fled, they sold information about your situation to several media outlets. By tomorrow morning, your story will be national news. The wealthy widow, the family betrayal, the hidden inheritance, it's going to be everywhere. The thought of becoming a public spectacle made her stomach turn. Her children would grow up with their family's drama playing out in newspapers and television programs. Their father's death would become entertainment for strangers. Marcus, she said, turning to face him directly. I need you to be completely honest with me about something. Anything. James asked you to protect us, and you've done that. But staying involved now means signing up for years of legal battles, media attention, and having your life scrutinized by people who want to hurt me. Is that really what you want? The question carried weight beyond logistics. She was giving him an exit, acknowledging that what had started as obligation to a dead friend had evolved into something more complex and potentially more dangerous. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching federal agents loading evidence into their vehicles while news crews captured every moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and certain. Alicia, 6 months ago I was just a construction foreman building houses for people who needed them. Today I helped prevent 3 children from being stolen from their mother by criminals who were willing to destroy innocent lives for money. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. James didn't ask me to protect you from this situation. He asked me to protect you for the rest of your life. And that's exactly what I intend to do. The words created a moment of stillness in the chaos surrounding them. Standing in the parking lot where she'd almost lost everything, Alicia felt something shifting between them. from alliance to partnership to something deeper and more permanent. The rest of your life is a long time, she said softly. I'm counting on it. Before she could respond, David approached with urgent news. We need to discuss immediate security measures. The Patterson family's flight suggests they may be more desperate than we initially realized. People who've committed financial fraud and fled the country have very few options left, and most of those options involve escalating to more serious crimes. What kind of serious crimes? The kind where they try to eliminate witnesses instead of fighting legal battles they can't win. The word sent ice through Alicia's veins. She'd been focused on protecting her children from custody challenges and media attention. She hadn't considered that Richard and Margaret might be willing to cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Are you saying they might try to hurt us? I'm saying that people who steal millions of dollars from children and flee to countries without extradition treaties aren't generally concerned about moral boundaries. David's expression was grave. We need to assume they're capable of anything and plan accordingly. As if responding to his warning, Alicia's phone rang with an unknown international number. She almost declined the call, but something made her answer. Hello, Alicia. Richard's voice was distorted by distance and technology, but the malice came through clearly. I hear you've been busy today. Richard, calling to confess your crimes. Calling to offer you one final opportunity to be reasonable. You can keep playing these legal games, spending years in court while your children grow up in the spotlight of a public scandal. Or you can accept a simple business arrangement. What kind of arrangement? You keep half of James's money. $125 million should be more than enough for anyone. We keep the other half and disappear permanently. Your children grow up wealthy and private, and everyone moves on with their lives. The offer was carefully calculated to sound reasonable, while revealing nothing about how desperate they'd become. But Alicia could hear something else in Richard's voice, fear, and the kind of recklessness that came from having no good options left. And if I refuse? Then you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when the next attack will come and what form it will take. Accidents happen, Alicia, even to very wealthy people. The threat was clear enough to be terrifying but vague enough to be legally deniable. Marcus had moved closer, listening to the conversation with growing alarm. Richard, I have a counteroffer. Turn yourself in, return every penny you stole, and I'll ensure your prison sentence includes opportunities for rehabilitation instead of maximum security isolation. His laugh was cold and bitter. You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? This isn't about money anymore. This is about ensuring that no one gets what they don't deserve. The line went dead, leaving Alicia staring at her phone while the implications of the conversation settled over her like a dark cloud. We need to move fast, David said. That sounded like someone who's moved beyond financial motivation into personal vendetta territory. What do? We disappear until we can locate them and eliminate the threat permanently. David was already pulling out his own phone, making arrangements. I have safe houses, security teams, resources that can keep you and the children protected while law enforcement hunts them down. For how long? However long it takes. Alicia looked at Marcus, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his expression. They'd won the battle for her inheritance and her children's custody. But the war was escalating beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd first decided to fight back. There's another option, Marcus said quietly. What? We don't run. We finish this. The words carried implications that made her pulse quicken. He wasn't talking about legal proceedings or financial recovery. He was talking about confronting the Patterson family directly, ending the threat permanently before it could evolve into something even more dangerous. Marcus, they're in another country. They have resources, connections, and nothing left to lose. So do we. David was shaking his head. I can't recommend that approach. The legal risks alone. The legal risks of what? Alicia interrupted. Of protecting my children from people who've already proven they're willing to commit multiple felonies to hurt us? She thought about Richard's threat, about the years of looking over her shoulder that he'd promised. About her children growing up afraid, never knowing when the next attack might come or what form it would take. David, what are the chances that Richard and Margaret will ever face real consequences for what they've done? His hesitation told her everything she needed to know. International financial crimes are notoriously difficult to prosecute. Even if we recover the money, getting them extradited for trial could take years, during which time they're free to plan whatever revenge they think I deserve. The mathematics of the situation were becoming clear. The Patterson family had escalated beyond civil disputes into criminal behavior, then fled beyond the reach of normal legal remedies. Traditional justice wasn't just unlikely, it was probably impossible. But Alicia had resources now that changed the equation entirely. $250 million could buy more than houses and college funds. It could buy protection, information, and if necessary, the kind of justice that courtrooms couldn't provide. "There's something else you should know," Marcus said, his voice carrying new weight. "James didn't just leave you money. He left you connections, people who owed him favors, who respected what he was trying to build, who understand that some threats can't be handled through official channels." "What kind of people?" "The kind who ensure that stolen children's college funds get returned, and that the people who stole them learn never to threaten innocent families again." The offer hung between them, loaded with possibilities that both terrified and tempted her. This was the crossroads James had foreseen. The moment when she would have to choose between being a victim of his family's cruelty or becoming someone capable of ending their threat permanently. Inside the shelter, she could see her children playing with building blocks, their innocence intact despite everything they'd been through. They deserved to grow up safe, secure, and free from the shadow of relatives who saw them as obstacles to be eliminated. "Tell me about these connections," she said quietly. And as Marcus began to explain the network James had built, not just of businesses and investments, but of people who understood that some justice couldn't wait for courtrooms, Alicia felt the last of her hesitation burning away. The Patterson family had made their choice when they threatened her children. Now she would make hers. The safe house was a sprawling estate in the Virginia countryside, isolated enough to provide security, but luxurious enough to feel like a gilded cage. Alicia stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the main living room, watching her children play in the secured backyard while armed guards maintained discreet positions around the property perimeter. It had been 3 weeks since Richard's threatening phone call, and the world James had built around her was revealing layers she'd never suspected. The connections Marcus had mentioned weren't just business associates or community leaders. They were former intelligence operatives, private military contractors, and people who operated in the shadows where traditional law enforcement couldn't reach. "The Patterson family has been located," announced Vincent Kozlov, the security coordinator David had recommended. He was a man in his 50s with silver hair, intelligent eyes, and the kind of calm presence that suggested he'd handled far worse situations than runaway relatives. "They're in a compound outside Grand Cayman, heavily fortified and well-connected to local authorities who aren't interested in cooperation with American law enforcement." Alicia turned from the window, noting how Marcus tensed at the news. Their relationship had become strained over the past weeks as the reality of their situation became clearer. What had started as romantic possibility was being crushed under the weight of moral complexity and escalating danger. "What kind of fortified?" she asked. "Private security, surveillance systems, and enough legal protection to make conventional extraction extremely difficult." Vincent's tone suggested he wasn't talking about conventional extraction. "However, there are other options available to someone with your resources." "What kind of options?" "The kind that ensure Richard and Margaret Patterson never threaten you or your children again, but also the kind that can't be undone once initiated." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of her children's laughter through the windows. Marcus, David, and Vincent were all watching her, waiting for a decision that would fundamentally change who she was and what she was willing to become. "Show me," she said quietly. Vincent opened a laptop and displayed satellite imagery of a tropical compound that looked more like a resort than a hiding place. "They're living comfortably on stolen money while your children sleep behind bulletproof glass. The local government receives significant donations that ensure their cooperation. Traditional extradition could take years, if it happens at all. And the non-traditional approach? A team of specialists retrieves the stolen funds and ensures the thieves understand that threatening American children has consequences they didn't anticipate." Vincent's language was carefully neutral, but the implications were clear. The recovery would be permanent, and the threat would be permanently neutralized. David cleared his throat. "Alicia, I have to advise you that what he's describing could constitute conspiracy to commit." "Could constitute justice," Marcus interrupted. James knew this might happen. He built these connections specifically for situations where the legal system fails to protect innocent people. "The legal system hasn't failed yet," David protested. "We have ongoing investigations, federal charges." "We have paperwork," Vincent said bluntly. Meanwhile, Your client's children are living like prisoners while the people who stole from them plan their next move. As if summoned by his words, Alicia's secure phone rang with another international number. This time, it was Margaret's voice that filled the room through the speaker. "Hello, Alicia. How are you enjoying your little fortress?" The casual tone was more unsettling than Richard's obvious threats. Margaret sounded relaxed, almost amused by the situation she'd helped create. "Margaret, I hear you're enjoying the stolen college funds my children won't be able to use for their education. $2.3 million doesn't go as far as it used to, but it's enough to make life comfortable while we plan our next conversation." Margaret's voice carried a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Speaking of which, we've been thinking about your children quite a lot lately." Ice formed in Alicia's veins. "What about my children? Such beautiful babies. And so vulnerable, even behind all that expensive security. Did you know that Marcus attends a preschool program 3 times a week? Little building blocks and finger painting with other children whose parents can afford the best protection money can buy." The words hit Alicia like physical blows. Margaret was describing details that should have been impossible to know from thousands of miles away. Either their security had been compromised, or the Patterson family had resources that extended far beyond what anyone had anticipated. "How are you getting this information?" "Alicia, dear, you've spent too much time thinking about money and not enough time thinking about connections. The Patterson family has been influential for 3 generations. Did you really think we'd be helpless just because we left the country?" Vincent was already moving, pulling out his own communication device and barking orders to unseen security teams. But Margaret wasn't finished. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer $100 million to an account we'll provide within the next 48 hours. In exchange, we'll forget we ever learned about your children's routines, your security protocols, and the surprising number of vulnerabilities in even the most expensive protection services. And if I refuse? Then you'll discover that some accidents are very difficult to prevent, even for the most devoted mothers." The line went dead, leaving the room in stunned silence. Vincent's security teams were already implementing emergency protocols, but the damage was done. The Patterson family had demonstrated that distance and resources didn't guarantee safety. "How is this possible?" Alicia demanded. "You said this place was secure." "It is secure," Vincent replied grimly. "But security is only as strong as the people who know about it. Someone with access to your protection details has been compromised." The paranoia that followed was suffocating. Everyone became suspect: household staff, security personnel, even David's legal team. Background checks were run and rerun. Communication devices were replaced. The children's routines were completely restructured, turning their temporary refuge into an even more restrictive prison. But the worst part was watching Marcus withdraw into professional distance. The man who'd stood with her through every crisis was now viewing her through the lens of someone who'd chosen to enter a world where children became targets and love became liability. "You don't have to stay," she told him on the 4th night after Margaret's call. They were sitting in the estate study, separated by an emotional distance that felt wider than the physical space between their chairs. "That's not what this is about, isn't it? You signed up to help with construction projects and legal battles, not international conspiracies and threats against children." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the fire crackling in the marble fireplace. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness she'd never heard before. "Do you know what James told me about you during our last conversation?" "What?" "He said you were the strongest person he'd ever met, but that your strength came from love, not anger. He was worried that if his family pushed too hard, you might become someone he wouldn't recognize." The words stung because they contained truth she didn't want to acknowledge. The woman planning international operations to neutralize threats was different from the nurse who'd dedicated her life to helping children heal. The transformation felt necessary, but it also felt like a loss. "What would you have me do?" "Let them keep threatening my children until they follow through. I want you to remember that the goal isn't just keeping them safe, it's keeping them innocent. They shouldn't grow up knowing their mother solved problems by having people disappeared." The accusation hung between them like a wall. Marcus wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't offering alternatives that would actually protect her family from people who operated beyond the reach of conventional justice. "Vincent," she called out, knowing he was monitoring the conversation from the security center. "How long would it take to implement the Cayman operation?" 72 hours from authorization, came the response through the room's communication system. And the probability of success? 97% for fund recovery. 100% for threat neutralization. Marcus stood abruptly, his expression filled with disappointment and something that might have been grief. Alicia, once you give that authorization, there's no coming back from who you become. There was no coming back the moment they threw my children into the rain. Yes, there was. There's always a choice between justice and revenge, between protection and elimination. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, the choice seems to be between my family's safety and my husband's relatives' lives. And that's not really a choice at all. The words created a finality between them that neither had anticipated. Marcus walked toward the door, then stopped without turning around. James also told me that if you ever had to choose between being the person he fell in love with and being the person his family forced you to become, I should remind you that your children need their mother more than they need revenge. He left without waiting for a response, and Alicia was alone with the weight of decisions that would define not just her future, but the kind of person her children would grow up calling mother. The next morning brought news that changed everything again. Vincent entered the study with David and an expression that suggested something catastrophic had happened. What now? Richard and Margaret aren't in the Cayman compound anymore, Vincent said. They left 2 days ago, and we've lost track of their location. How do you lose track of 2 people you've been monitoring for weeks? The same way they've been monitoring your children. They have better resources than we initially estimated. Vincent's professional composure was cracking slightly. But there's something else. The $100 million demand wasn't their endgame. It was a distraction. David pulled out his laptop, displaying financial records that made Alicia's blood run cold. While we've been focused on the direct threats, they've been implementing a longer-term strategy. They've hired a team of private investigators to build a comprehensive file on your life, your decisions since James's death, and specifically your recent security arrangements. What kind of file? The kind that gets presented to international courts when wealthy Americans are accused of using their resources for illegal activities. David's voice was grim. They're building a case to have you extradited for conspiracy charges related to the operations you've been planning. The room spun slightly as the implications became clear. The Patterson family wasn't just trying to steal money or threaten her children. They were trying to destroy her completely, using her own defensive measures as evidence of criminal behavior. How is that possible? Because everything you've done to protect your family can be reframed as evidence of criminal conspiracy, depending on who's presenting the information and which jurisdiction is making the determination. David's expression was grave. They're essentially laying a legal trap. If you authorize the Cayman operation, they'll use it as proof that you're a dangerous criminal who should be separated from her children permanently. And if I don't authorize it, then they remain free to continue escalating their threats until you're forced into a response that gives them exactly the evidence they need. Vincent nodded grimly. It's a sophisticated strategy. They've maneuvered you into a position where any action you take can be used against you, while inaction leaves your family vulnerable to whatever they plan next. Alicia sank into her chair, feeling the full weight of the trap closing around her. The Patterson family had evolved beyond simple greed into something more calculating and dangerous. They weren't just trying to steal her inheritance. They were systematically destroying every option she had for protecting herself and her children. There is one possibility, Vincent said carefully, but it requires accepting a level of risk that most people wouldn't consider reasonable. What possibility? We let them make the next move. We document everything they do, gather evidence of their escalating threats, and use their own criminal behavior to build an unassailable legal case. Using my children as bait. Using your family's safety as motivation for them to reveal the full extent of their intentions. The suggestion was monstrous and logical in equal measure. Instead of trying to end the threat proactively, they would allow Richard and Margaret to continue escalating until they crossed lines that even international courts couldn't ignore. How many families would accept that level of risk? She asked. Most wouldn't have the resources to make it work, Vincent admitted. But you do. We can provide protection that's almost certainly sufficient while gathering evidence that's absolutely sufficient. Almost certainly, there are no guarantees in this business. But the alternative is authorizing actions that will definitely result in criminal charges that could separate you from your children permanently. The mathematics were brutal but clear. Risk everything on defense and evidence gathering, or lose everything by taking offensive action. Neither option offered the security she wanted for her family, but one at least preserved the possibility of a future where she remained in their lives. Her secure phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check your email. Time to understand what you're really dealing with. Margaret had sent a video file that made Alicia's hands shake as she opened it. The footage showed her children playing in the secured backyard, but it had been taken from an angle that should have been impossible given the estate's security perimeter. The message was clear. Even their most protected sanctuary wasn't safe. But there was something else in the video that made her blood freeze. In the background, barely visible but unmistakably present, was Marcus talking to someone outside the camera's range. The timestamp showed it was from yesterday, after their conversation about choices and consequences. "Vincent," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to run a comprehensive background check on Marcus Webb. Everything. His military service, his financial records, his connection to James, everything." "Ma'am, just do it. And I need the results within the hour." As Vincent left to implement her request, Alicia stared at the frozen video frame showing the man she'd trusted with her heart having a conversation that might have compromised her children's safety. The betrayals were multiplying faster than she could process them. Carmen had been a paid informant. The Patterson family had resources she'd never suspected. And now Marcus, the one person who'd seemed genuine in his desire to protect her family, might be playing a role she'd never imagined. Sitting alone in the study where she'd been planning international operations to protect people who might not need protection from the threats she thought she understood, Alicia felt the full weight of James's final gift settling over her. He'd left her with $250 million and the power to destroy anyone who threatened their children. But he'd also left her in a world where everyone had hidden agendas, every alliance carried hidden costs, and every choice led deeper into moral complexity that threatened to transform her into someone her children might someday fear. The phone in her hand buzzed with another message: 48 hours. $100 million. Or find out what happens when we stop being subtle. Outside the bulletproof windows, her children continued playing. Their laughter a reminder of everything she was fighting to preserve and everything she risked losing in the process. The darkest part of the descent was realizing that winning might cost her soul, and losing might cost her everything else. Vincent returned 43 minutes later with a file that would change everything Alicia thought she understood about the past month of her life. "Ma'am, you need to see this immediately." The background check on Marcus Webb revealed layers of deception that made her stomach turn. But not the kind she'd feared. "Marcus Webb doesn't exist," Vincent said, settling into the chair across from her. "The man you've been working with is actually Captain Michael Torres, former Army Special Forces, discharged honorably after a classified operation in Afghanistan went wrong." Alicia stared at the military service records, trying to process what she was seeing. He lied about his identity? He assumed the identity of Marcus Webb 18 months ago, on direct orders from your husband. Vincent pulled out additional documents. James didn't just hire him for protection. He hired him to become someone else entirely, someone who could integrate into your life naturally when the time came. The photographs in the file showed a man in military dress uniform who was clearly the Marcus she knew, but younger, harder, with the bearing of someone accustomed to life and death decisions. Captain Michael Torres had led rescue operations in hostile territory, specializing in extraction of American civilians from situations where conventional military intervention wasn't possible. Why the false identity? Because James anticipated that his family might escalate beyond domestic threats. He wanted someone protecting you who had experience with international hostile situations, but he also wanted that person to be able to disappear completely if necessary. Another revelation that recontextualized everything she thought she understood. James hadn't just prepared for his family's financial attacks. He'd prepared for the possibility that they might become violent, might flee the country, might require responses that only someone with Michael's specific skills could provide. The conversation in the video was him reporting to his backup team. When Margaret's call revealed security breaches, he activated protocols your husband had established for exactly this scenario. Vincent's expression was grave. "Ma'am, the man you've been falling in love with is one of the most lethal operatives the U.S. military has ever produced. And he's been planning a response to the Patterson family that doesn't require your authorization or moral compromise." The words hit her like a physical blow. The gentle construction foreman who'd shown her photos of struggling families was actually a decorated Special Forces officer, who'd been playing a role designed by her dead husband. Every conversation, every moment of growing attraction, every sense of partnership, it had all been orchestrated. How much of it was real? Vincent hesitated, clearly recognizing the personal nature of her question. That's not something I can answer from military records. Where is he now? Honestly, I don't know. He disappeared from our security grid about 6 hours ago, just after receiving what appeared to be an encrypted communication from an outside source. The betrayal felt worse than Carmen's treachery or the Patterson family's theft. Those had been acts of greed and desperation. This felt like the careful manipulation of her grief and vulnerability by the person she'd trusted most. Her secure phone rang, interrupting the spiral of hurt and confusion. The display showed Marcus's number, or rather, Michael's number. Answer it, Vincent advised. But keep him talking long enough for us to trace the call. Hello, Michael. The pause on the other end confirmed that she'd learned his real identity. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that hadn't been there during their last conversation. You know, I know enough. Where are you? Somewhere I can tell you the truth without compromising what needs to happen next. Another pause. Alicia, everything about my identity was a lie except for one thing. What's that? How I feel about you and those children. The words should have provided comfort, but they felt hollow after learning about the depth of deception involved in their entire relationship. Was any of it real? The conversations, the connection, the way you looked at me when you thought I wasn't watching. All of it. James created the circumstances, but he couldn't manufacture emotions. What happened between us was never part of the plan. Vincent was gesturing urgently, indicating they needed to keep him talking longer to complete the trace. But Alicia found herself caring less about his location than about understanding the scope of what had been planned without her knowledge. What else did James arrange? What other parts of my life have been orchestrated by a dead man? More than you know. Less than you fear. Michael's voice carried the strain of someone carrying burdens he couldn't fully share. Alicia, the Patterson family made a mistake when they threatened your children directly. They've escalated beyond financial crime into territory where different rules apply. What kind of different rules? The kind that allow American special operations to recover stolen assets and neutralize threats to American citizens, even in non-extradition countries. The implications hit her like a thunderbolt. Michael wasn't just talking about private security or hired mercenaries. He was talking about official U.S. military intervention. That's impossible. The government doesn't get involved in family financial disputes. They do when those disputes involve stolen funds being used to finance international threats against American children. They do when wealthy expatriates use their resources to corrupt foreign officials and undermine American law enforcement. Michael's tone grew harder. And they definitely do when former military personnel with active security clearances request assistance for operations that serve broader national interests. Vincent was nodding grimly, apparently understanding implications that Alicia was still trying to process. What broader national interests? The Cayman Islands have become a hub for American criminals who think offshore banking makes them untouchable. Richard and Margaret Patterson are connected to a network of tax evaders, money launderers, and fraud perpetrators who cost the U.S. economy billions annually. Michael paused. Taking them down sends a message that resonates far beyond your family situation. You're talking about a military operation. I'm talking about justice that doesn't require you to compromise your moral principles or risk criminal charges for protecting your children. The offer was seductive in its simplicity. Let others handle the dirty work, while she maintained clean hands and a clear conscience. But it also meant accepting that her dead husband had orchestrated not just her protection, but the potential military intervention in her personal crisis. Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Always. If I hadn't fallen in love with you, would you still be doing this? The silence stretched long enough that she could hear Vincent's equipment humming in the background. When Michael finally answered, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. If you hadn't fallen in love with me, I wouldn't have spent the last 3 weeks questioning everything I thought I knew about duty, mission objectives, and the difference between following orders and following my heart. That's not an answer. Yes, I would still be doing this. Because James asked me to protect you, and because children shouldn't grow up in fear of people who see them as obstacles to money. Another pause. But how I'm doing it, why it matters to me personally, whether I survive what happens next, All of that changed when I realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life proving that not everyone in your world has hidden agendas. The trace completed with a soft beep, and Vincent held up a tablet showing Michael's location. He was at a private airfield 40 miles away, apparently preparing for departure. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To end this. The Patterson family has 46 hours left on their ultimatum. I intend to resolve the situation with 45 hours to spare." "Michael, wait." But the line was already dead, leaving her staring at the phone while Vincent coordinated with his security teams to intercept someone who probably didn't want to be found. "Ma'am," Vincent said after finishing his radio communications, "we need to discuss immediate protective measures. If Torres is implementing the protocols James established, your family could become a target for escalated retaliation." "What kind of escalated retaliation?" "The kind that happens when international criminals realize they're about to face consequences they can't buy their way out of." As if summoned by his warning, the estate's alarm system began blaring with an urgency that sent ice through Alicia's veins. Vincent's radio crackled with reports from the perimeter teams. Unknown vehicles approaching from multiple directions. Armed occupants confirmed. This is not a drill. Through the study windows, she could see her children being rushed inside by security personnel, their playtime interrupted by a crisis they couldn't understand. Marcus was crying, calling for his mother while strangers in tactical gear surrounded him. Jade and Zoe clung to each other, their small faces reflecting terror that no 3-year-old should ever experience. "How did they find us?" Alicia demanded. "The same way they've been staying ahead of us. They have resources and connections we haven't fully identified." Vincent was already moving toward the security center, speaking rapidly into his radio. "All teams, implement lockdown protocols. Assume hostile intent and prepare for siege conditions." The next 20 minutes passed in a nightmare of coordinated violence that shattered any illusion of safety the estate had provided. Professional mercenaries breached the perimeter using military-grade equipment, while the security team fought desperately to maintain defensive positions. Alicia found herself in the estate's panic room with her children, listening to gunfire and explosions that seemed to be getting closer with each passing minute. The children were beyond terror now, huddled together in traumatized silence while their mother tried to project calm she didn't feel. "Mommy," Marcus whispered, his small voice barely audible over the chaos outside. "Are the bad people going to hurt us?" The question broke something inside her chest. These babies had lost their father to cancer, been thrown out of their home by relatives, lived in homeless shelters, and now faced armed attackers who saw them as acceptable casualties in a war over money. Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from Richard Patterson. "Enjoying your fortress now?" His voice carried smug satisfaction. Professional security is expensive, but it's not invincible when you're dealing with people who have unlimited resources and no moral constraints. "Richard, there are children here. Whatever problem you have with me, my problem is with you stealing what belongs to my family. The solution is simple. Transfer the money, and the shooting stops. The money belongs to my children. It's their inheritance from their father. Their father was my brother, and family money stays in the family. Real family, not some opportunistic." The call cut off as another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. Through the panic room's monitors, Alicia could see security personnel falling back toward the main house while the attacking force advanced with professional precision. Vincent's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ma'am, we need to implement emergency evacuation protocols. The defensive perimeter has been compromised. What about my children? There's a helicopter landing zone on the roof. We can extract your family, but it has to happen now." The monitors showed the attacking force was only minutes away from breaching the main house. But they also showed something else that made her heart stop. One of the mercenaries was carrying equipment that looked suspiciously like the kind used for forced sedation. They weren't just trying to kill her family. They were trying to take her children. "Vincent, how long until backup arrives?" "Local law enforcement is 20 minutes out. Federal response could be an hour or more. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. The attacking force would accomplish their objective and disappear long before any official help arrived." Her phone buzzed with a text message that made her blood freeze. "Transfer authorization code required within 60 seconds or extraction protocols commence. Your choice, lose the money or lose the children." The ultimatum was brutally simple. Give them access to the inheritance that belonged to her children, or watch those same children be kidnapped by professional criminals who'd already proven they were willing to kill anyone who stood in their way. "Mommy," Jade's small voice cut through the panic. "Why are people trying to hurt us?" The question crystallized everything. Her children didn't deserve to pay for adult decisions about money and revenge. They didn't deserve to grow up traumatized by violence they couldn't understand. They deserved to be protected by a mother who put their safety above everything else. But giving Richard what he wanted would mean surrendering not just the inheritance, but any hope of justice for what the Patterson family had done. It would mean they could threaten her family forever, knowing she would always choose her children's immediate safety over long-term consequences. The sound of gunfire was getting closer. 58 seconds. 57. 56. "Vincent," she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Initiate the roof evacuation. Get my children to safety." "What about the transfer authorization?" Alicia looked at her babies, Marcus sucking his thumb, Jade and Zoe holding hands, all three of them looking to their mother to somehow make the bad things stop happening. 50 seconds. 49. 48. "I'll handle the transfer," she said, knowing she was about to make a choice that would define the rest of their lives. But as she pulled out the financial access device David had provided for emergencies, another sound cut through the gunfire. The distinctive whine of military helicopters approaching fast and low. Through the panic room monitors, she watched as 4 Black Hawks descended on the estate like avenging angels, disgorging Special Forces operators who moved with lethal precision against the mercenary assault team. The tide of battle shifted in seconds. Professional criminals, no matter how well equipped, were no match for elite military units operating with official authorization and unlimited firepower. Her secure phone rang with Michael's number. "Are you and the children safe?" "We're in the panic room." "Michael, how?" James's protocols included authorization for military intervention if direct threats against American citizens reached a specified threshold. His voice was steady, professional, completely different from the construction foreman she'd known. Attacking a family with children using international mercenaries definitely qualifies. Through the monitors, she watched the assault team being systematically neutralized by operators who moved like ghosts through the estate grounds. The violence was efficient, decisive, and completely one-sided. "It's over," Michael continued. "The immediate threat has been eliminated." "What about Richard and Margaret?" "They made a mistake when they authorized an armed assault on American soil. That escalated this from a financial dispute to an act of terrorism." Michael's tone carried dark satisfaction. "There are no non-extradition treaties for terrorist attacks against children." The gunfire outside had stopped, replaced by the measured voices of military personnel securing the area. But Alicia found herself shaking as the adrenaline of the past hour began to fade. "Michael, where does this end? How many more times do we have to go through this before my children can have normal lives?" "It ends tonight. The Patterson family just crossed every line that matters in front of federal witnesses, using international resources to threaten American children. They won't get another chance." The words should have provided relief, but Alicia felt only exhaustion. The violence was over, but the trauma remained. Her children had just experienced something that would require years of therapy to process. The inheritance that was supposed to secure their future had become the source of their nightmares. "I want it to be finished," she said quietly. "All of it. I want my children to be safe, and I want to never think about the Patterson family again." "That can be arranged. But there's something you need to understand about the choice you almost made." "What choice?" "The transfer authorization. You were about to give them the money to protect your children." "Yes." The account they provided was linked to a terrorist financing network. Transferring money to it would have made you an accessory to international terrorism. They weren't just trying to steal your inheritance. They were trying to frame you for crimes that would have separated you from your children forever. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Even surrendering completely wouldn't have been enough. The Patterson family had evolved from greedy relatives into something far more dangerous. People willing to destroy innocent lives not just for money, but for the satisfaction of watching their victims suffer. "They wanted me to choose between my children's immediate safety and their future, but the choice was rigged," she realized. "Every choice they've given you has been rigged. That's why James built all these contingencies. He knew his family wouldn't stop at simple theft." Through the panic room monitors, she could see military personnel escorting her security team back toward the main house. The immediate crisis was over, but the larger questions remained. Michael, I need to ask you something. Anything. When this is really finished, when Richard and Margaret are in custody, when the legal cases are resolved, when my children can finally be safe, what happens to us? The question carried weight beyond the immediate crisis. She was asking about the man who'd become essential to her life while playing a role designed by her dead husband. She was asking whether their connection could survive the revelation that their entire relationship had been built on strategic deception. I don't know, he admitted, but I'd like to find out. It wasn't the answer she'd hoped for, but it was honest. And after weeks of deception and manipulation from every direction, honesty felt like a foundation they could maybe build on. The children are asking for you, she said. They're scared, and you're one of the few people who's made them feel safe. I'm on my way up. As she waited for him to reach the panic room, Alicia looked at her babies and tried to imagine a future where tonight's violence was just a bad memory instead of a defining trauma. The inheritance James had left them was secure, but the price of protecting it had been higher than anyone should pay. The darkest part of the descent was realizing that winning the war might have cost her children their innocence. But looking at their faces, trusting, resilient, still believing their mother could protect them from anything, she felt something shift inside her chest. They were survivors, just like she was. And with enough love, therapy, and time, even the worst traumas could heal. The Patterson family's war was ending. Her family's healing could finally begin. 3 hours later, the estate looked like a war zone wrapped in yellow crime scene tape. Federal agents swarmed the property, photographing bullet holes and collecting evidence while forensics teams processed what remained of the mercenary assault team. The children were finally asleep in a secure bedroom, sedated by pediatric trauma specialists who'd been flown in specifically for situations like this. Alicia sat in the blood-stained living room, still wearing clothes torn during the evacuation, watching Michael. She couldn't think of him as Marcus anymore. Debrief federal investigators about the military operation that had saved their lives. Captain Michael Torres was a different person entirely from the gentle construction foreman who'd shown her photos of struggling families. His posture was military straight, his voice clipped and professional, his eyes carrying the cold focus of someone who'd killed people tonight and felt no remorse about it. The hostile forces were neutralized with minimal collateral damage, he reported to Agent Sarah Williams from the FBI's counterterrorism unit. All evidence suggests coordination with international criminal networks operating from non-extradition territories. What about the primary targets? Richard and Margaret Patterson? Currently in federal custody in Grand Cayman. The government there became very cooperative once they understood the terrorism implications. Michael's tone carried dark satisfaction. Turns out their previous protection disappeared when American Special Forces started asking pointed questions about harboring enemies of the state. Agent Williams nodded, making notes in a file that was already thick with documentation. Mrs. Patterson, we'll need your formal statement about the threats your family received, but that can wait until morning. Right now, our priority is ensuring you understand the situation you're in. What situation? You're the primary witness in what's become a major international terrorism investigation. The Patterson family didn't just hire mercenaries, they hired mercenaries with connections to groups on federal watch lists. This case will likely take years to fully prosecute. The words hit Alicia like another blow to an already battered spirit. She'd thought tonight's violence would end the nightmare, but instead it was just the beginning of a different kind of hell. Years of depositions, court appearances, and security threats while lawyers fought over evidence and jurisdictions. What does that mean for my children? It means they'll need protection until every member of the conspiracy is identified and neutralized. Agent Williams consulted her notes. We're talking about a network that spans at least 4 countries and includes individuals with significant financial resources and military experience. How long? Conservatively? 3 to 5 years for the legal proceedings. Indefinitely for the security concerns. Michael stepped forward, his expression grim. Agent Williams, there are alternative approaches that could resolve this more efficiently. Captain Torres, this is now a federal investigation. Military solutions aren't appropriate for. Military solutions are exactly what prevented 3 American children from being kidnapped by international terrorists tonight. Michael's voice carried an edge that made everyone in the room pay attention. With respect, the legal system has had weeks to protect this family, and it failed. Direct action succeeded in 6 hours. The tension between military and civilian authority was palpable, But Alicia found herself caring less about jurisdictional disputes than about the larger implications of what she was hearing. Agent Williams, are you telling me that my children will spend the next 5 years living like prisoners because their relatives committed crimes? I'm telling you that your family is caught in the middle of something much larger than a domestic dispute. The Patterson family's criminal network has been under investigation for months. Your husband's death and the inheritance situation provided them with the motivation and resources to escalate beyond what we'd previously documented. A new thought occurred to Alicia, one that made her stomach turn. How long has the government been watching my family? Agent Williams exchanged glances with Michael before answering. Mrs. Patterson, there are aspects of this situation that involve national security classifications I can't discuss in detail. That's not an answer. Michael cleared his throat. Alicia, James contacted federal authorities 6 months before his death. He suspected his family was involved in activities that went beyond tax evasion and financial fraud. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. James knew they were criminals? He knew they were connected to people who laundered money for international criminal organizations. The inheritance he left you wasn't just about taking care of your family. It was about removing a major funding source from people who threaten American interests. Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. James hadn't just been protecting his wife and children from greedy relatives. He'd been using his death and her inheritance as bait in a federal investigation targeting international crime networks. So I've been a government asset this entire time, and nobody thought to inform me? You've been a protected witness with plausible deniability, Agent Williams corrected. Informing you would have compromised both the investigation and your family's safety. My family's safety was compromised anyway. My children just lived through a military assault. Which we were prepared for, Michael said quietly. Everything that happened tonight was anticipated and planned for. The attack was allowed to proceed because we needed documentation of the network's willingness to use violence against American civilians. The words created a silence that felt like falling into an abyss. Michael was telling her that her children had been deliberately placed in danger, not to protect them, but to gather evidence against their attackers. You used my babies as bait. We used professional security and military assets to ensure your babies were never in real danger, while gathering evidence that will prevent other families from being targeted by the same network. Never in real danger? The words came out as a scream that surprised everyone in the room. They're 3 years old. They were in a panic room listening to gunfire. They're going to have nightmares for years. Alicia was on her feet, fury and betrayal coursing through her like electricity. Every person she'd trusted, James, Michael, even the federal agents, had been playing games with her children's lives while pretending to protect them. How many other families have you sacrificed for this investigation? How many other children have been traumatized so you could build your case? Mrs. Patterson, Agent Williams said carefully, I understand you're upset. I'm not upset. I'm done. Alicia's voice carried a finality that made everyone in the room straighten. I want my children out of this investigation. I want them relocated somewhere safe where they can have normal lives without federal agents and military operations and people shooting at their house. That's not possible, Michael said. The network knows who you are now. Running won't protect you. It will just make you harder for us to defend. Then find another way to defend us. Find a way that doesn't involve using my children as bait for terrorists. Agent Williams closed her notebook. Mrs. Patterson, I need to be very clear about something. The Patterson family is now facing federal terrorism charges that could result in life sentences. The network they're connected to has resources that rival small countries. There is no safe place to run, and there is no way to make this go away by wishing it hadn't happened. Then what are my options? You can continue cooperating with the investigation while we provide the highest level of protection available. Or you can attempt to disappear on your own and hope that $250 million and 3 children don't make you easy to find. The choice was no choice at all, just like every other decision the Patterson family crisis had forced on her. Stay and live as a government asset with her children's safety dependent on federal competence, or run and hope that money could buy better protection than the United States military. There's a third option, Michael said quietly. Both Alicia and Agent Williams turned to stare at him. The network operates because it has resources and patience. It can wait years for opportunities, plan complex operations, and survive the loss of individual assets. Michael's voice carried the weight of someone presenting a military briefing. But it's also dependent on the assumption that its targets will behave predictably, that wealthy Americans will choose legal solutions over direct action. What are you suggesting? Agent Williams demanded. I'm suggesting that this particular target might benefit from demonstrating that some threats require unconventional responses. The euphemisms were carefully chosen, but the meaning was clear. Michael was talking about abandoning legal proceedings in favor of permanent solutions that couldn't be overturned by appeals courts or international negotiations. Captain Torres, you are not authorized to. My authorization doesn't come from the FBI, Michael interrupted. It comes from the Department of Defense, and it's classified at levels that supersede this investigation. The room fell silent as the implications of his statement settled over everyone present. Michael wasn't just a Special Forces operator assigned to protect Alicia's family. He was part of a military operation with objectives that went beyond civilian law enforcement. What kind of objectives? Alicia asked. The kind that ensure American citizens can live their lives without fear of international criminal networks that think money makes them untouchable. Agent Williams stood abruptly. This conversation is over. Mrs. Patterson, you and your children are under federal protection as of right now. Captain Torres, you're relieved of any responsibilities related to this family. But Michael was shaking his head. Ma'am, with respect, you don't have the authority to relieve me of anything. My mission parameters were established by people who outrank everyone in this room. Then contact those people and explain that this situation is now under FBI jurisdiction. I already have. They're very interested in learning that federal agents would prefer years of legal proceedings over efficient resolution of a threat to American children. The power struggle playing out in front of her felt surreal to Alicia, but the personal implications were becoming clear. Michael was offering her a choice between living as a federal witness for years or accepting whatever efficient resolution his military superiors had authorized. What would efficient resolution look like? She asked. Michael's expression didn't change, but his voice carried new weight. It would look like the network losing enough key assets that it decides American families aren't worth the cost of continued operations. You're talking about assassination. I'm talking about military action against international threats to American citizens. Agent Williams was already on her radio, calling for backup and higher authority. But Alicia found herself focused on a different question entirely. Michael, if you do this, if you implement your efficient resolution, what happens to us afterward? Afterward, your children grow up safe and normal, while the people who threaten them serve as examples of what happens when international criminals target American families. That's not what I meant. He was quiet for a long moment, understanding the personal dimension of her question. She was asking whether their relationship could survive him becoming an assassin for her family's benefit. She was asking whether she could love someone who solved their problems by killing people, even if those people deserved it. I don't know, he admitted. But I know that watching your children live in fear for the next 5 years while lawyers argue about jurisdiction would definitely destroy any chance we might have. The honesty was brutal and accurate. The federal investigation would turn their family into a perpetual crime scene, with her children growing up surrounded by agents and security protocols instead of normal childhood experiences. How long would your approach take? 72 hours. And the guarantees? There are no guarantees in either approach. But my way protects your children's childhood. The FBI's way sacrifices it for legal procedure. Agent Williams returned from her radio conversation, her expression grim. Mrs. Patterson, I've been instructed to inform you that this decision is above my authority level. You'll be contacted within the hour by people who can provide more complete information about your options. What kind of people? The kind who make decisions about national security that civilian agencies implement. The implications were staggering. Alicia's family crisis had escalated from domestic theft to international terrorism to military operations that required approval from the highest levels of government. Her children's safety had become a matter of national security. Through the windows, she could see federal agents continuing to process the crime scene while military personnel maintained security perimeters. Her children were asleep in a bedroom protected by enough firepower to defend a small city, dreaming whatever dreams children have after experiencing violence they shouldn't understand. I need to see them, she said quietly. Of course, Agent Williams replied. But Mrs. Patterson, you should understand that whatever decision gets made about resolution approaches, your family's life has changed permanently. There's no going back to the way things were before tonight. Alicia nodded, understanding that the woman was trying to prepare her for the reality that wealthy witnesses in international terrorism cases don't get to return to normal suburban lives. As she walked toward the bedroom where her children slept, Alicia felt the weight of choices she'd never wanted to make settling over her like a shroud. In the next few hours, she would have to decide between trusting the legal system to protect her family over years of proceedings, or trusting military professionals to protect them through methods that couldn't be undone. Either choice would change who she was fundamentally. But watching her babies sleep peacefully despite everything they'd endured, she realized that the transformation had already begun the moment she'd chosen to fight back instead of accepting the Patterson family's theft. The question now wasn't whether she would become someone different. It was whether the person she became would be someone her children could still love when they were old enough to understand what she'd done to protect them. Outside the bedroom windows, she could see Michael coordinating with military personnel while Agent Williams spoke urgently into her secure communication device. Two approaches to the same problem. Two different definitions of justice. Two possible futures for her family. In 6 hours, she would have to choose which price she was willing to pay for her children's safety, and live with the consequences forever. At 3:47 a.m., Alicia sat beside her children's bed watching them sleep, while 2 phone calls would determine the rest of their lives. In one room, Agent Williams was coordinating with FBI leadership about witness protection protocols that would keep her family safe, but imprisoned by security measures for years. In another room, Michael was receiving authorization for military operations that would eliminate the threat permanently, but transform her into someone complicit in state-sanctioned assassination. Marcus stirred in his sleep, his small hand reaching out for comfort that wasn't there. She touched his forehead gently, feeling the fever that often came with trauma in children so young. Jade and Zoe pressed closer together, seeking the safety of physical contact and unconscious recognition that their world had become dangerous in ways they couldn't comprehend. "Mommy's here," she whispered, though they couldn't hear her. "Mommy's going to make sure you're safe." But even as she said the words, she wondered what version of Mommy would emerge from the choices she was about to make. The door opened quietly behind her, and she turned to see David Chen entering with an expression that suggested he'd been dealing with phone calls from people whose names appeared in classified directories. "The decision makers want to speak with you," he said softly. Both sides. Both sides. FBI Director Harrison will be calling in 10 minutes to discuss the federal approach. Defense Secretary Morrison will call 15 minutes after that to discuss military options. David's voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent the last hour learning about aspects of government he'd never suspected existed. "Alicia, I need to tell you something before those calls." She gestured for him to sit in the chair beside the bed, keeping her voice low enough not to disturb the children. James didn't just anticipate his family's greed. He anticipated that their criminal connections would eventually require responses that civilian law enforcement couldn't provide. David paused, choosing his words carefully. "The inheritance he left you wasn't just about financial security. It was about giving you enough resources to survive a war that he knew was coming." "What kind of war?" "The kind where international criminal networks test whether American families can be terrorized into submission, or whether the U.S. government will protect its citizens regardless of legal niceties." Another layer of her husband's final gift revealing itself. James hadn't just been protecting his wife and children. He'd been positioning them as a test case for how America responded to international threats against civilian families. "So my children and I are weapons in a policy debate? You're American citizens whose safety has become a matter of national precedent. How the government handles your situation will determine how international criminals approach other wealthy American families in the future." The weight of that responsibility felt crushing. Alicia had thought she was fighting for her family's inheritance and safety. Now she was apparently fighting for the principle of whether international criminals could target American children with impunity. Her secure phone rang with a call from FBI Director Harrison. "Mrs. Patterson, I want to assure you that the Federal Bureau of Investigation is committed to protecting your family through legal means that uphold American values and constitutional principles." The director's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected millions of lives, but Alicia found herself focused on the word legal. "Director Harrison, with respect, your legal means have required my 3-year-old children to survive a military assault. How exactly do constitutional principles protect them from the next attack?" by ensuring that we build cases that result in permanent incarceration of everyone involved in threatening your family. Justice through proper legal channels may take time, but it provides resolution that can't be overturned by changing political winds. How much time? Realistically, 3 to 5 years for the primary prosecutions. Longer for appeals and related cases. Alicia looked at her sleeping children, trying to imagine them at 6 and 7 years old, still living with armed guards and security protocols, still unable to attend normal schools or have normal friendships because their relatives had committed crimes. And during those 3 to 5 years, my children live how exactly? Under the highest level of federal protection available. Private tutors, secure housing, limited public exposure. Essentially, a very comfortable form of witness protection. You're describing a prison. I'm describing safety that preserves your children's lives while preserving the rule of law that protects all American families. The distinction felt hollow when she imagined Marcus asking why he couldn't play in public parks, or Jade wondering why other children couldn't come to their house, or Zoe growing up believing that normal life required bulletproof windows and armed escorts. Director Harrison, what happens if the legal approach fails? If appeals succeed, if witnesses disappear, if international courts refuse extradition? The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you within constitutional limitations. The call ended exactly as the second phone began ringing. Defense Secretary Morrison's voice carried different authority. Not the careful legal precision of civilian leadership, but the blunt certainty of someone accustomed to military solutions. Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to be direct with you because your children's lives depend on clarity. The international criminal network that targeted your family operates in 17 countries and has been responsible for the deaths of at least 43 American citizens over the past 5 years. The number hit her like a physical blow. 43 people? Wealthy Americans who thought legal proceedings would protect them from criminals operating beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement. They were wrong. And you're telling me this because? Because Captain Torres and his team have been authorized to implement permanent solutions that ensure this network understands that targeting American families, especially children, carries consequences that transcend legal jurisdiction. Permanent solutions. The euphemism didn't disguise what he was talking about. You want me to authorize assassination. I want you to understand that some threats require military responses, and that the Department of Defense is prepared to provide those responses with or without your explicit approval. The words created a chill that had nothing to do with the early morning temperature. Secretary Morrison was telling her that the military operation would proceed regardless of her preferences, but that her cooperation would determine how much control she retained over the process. What kind of control? Cooperation means we coordinate timing and methods to minimize risk to your family. Non-cooperation means we proceed on schedules and through methods determined by operational necessity rather than personal preference. Another impossible choice disguised as an option. Participate in assassination or have it happen around her family without her input. How many people are you talking about killing? However many it takes to ensure that international criminal networks understand that American children are not acceptable targets. The scope was staggering and terrifying. Morrison wasn't talking about eliminating just Richard and Margaret Patterson. He was talking about dismantling an entire international criminal organization to make an example that would protect other American families. And afterward, what happens to my family when this becomes public? It doesn't become public. Military operations against international threats are classified indefinitely. People will know. 43 deaths across 17 countries don't happen quietly. Deaths happen. Accidents, sudden illnesses, mysterious disappearances. International criminals live dangerous lives and experience predictable mortality rates. The clinical description of mass assassination made her stomach turn, but she couldn't escape the logic underlying his approach. Legal proceedings had failed to protect 43 previous families. Military action might succeed in protecting her children and preventing future victims. Secretary Morrison, I need to ask you something directly. Go ahead. If I choose the FBI approach, and it fails to protect my children, will you consider that an acceptable loss for the sake of constitutional principles? Mrs. Patterson, I consider any loss of American children to international criminals an unacceptable failure of government responsibility. That's not what I asked. The pause stretched long enough for her to understand that she'd identified the fundamental tension in her situation. The FBI valued process over outcomes, while the military valued outcomes over process. Her children's lives hung in the balance between competing definitions of what justice required. If legal approaches prove insufficient to protect your family, we will implement military approaches regardless of civilian preferences, Morrison said finally. The only question is whether that happens with your cooperation or without it. Both calls ended, leaving her alone with sleeping children and a choice that would define not just their future, but the kind of person she would become. Through the window, she could see Michael coordinating with military personnel, while Agent Williams managed federal crime scene investigators. Two approaches to the same problem, each requiring her to become someone different from the pediatric nurse who'd married James Patterson 6 years ago. Choose the FBI, and she became a perpetual victim whose children grew up in gilded captivity while lawyers argued about jurisdiction. Choose the military, and she became complicit in international assassination while her children grew up safe, but oblivious to the violence that protected them. Marcus opened his eyes, looking directly at her with the trust that only children can maintain despite living through adult nightmares. "Mommy, are we safe now?" The question crystallized everything. Her son wasn't asking about legal proceedings or military operations or constitutional principles. He was asking whether his mother could protect him from the bad people who'd tried to hurt his family. "Yes, baby. Mommy's going to make sure you're always safe. Promise." The word hung in the air like a vow that would determine the rest of their lives. Looking into her son's eyes, Alicia felt the last of her moral uncertainty burning away. She'd been thinking about this choice in terms of competing ideologies about justice and law. But Marcus's question reframed everything in terms of maternal responsibility and unconditional love. Her children didn't need a mother who preserved constitutional principles while they lived in fear. They needed a mother who eliminated threats so they could live in peace. The transformation was complete. Alicia Patterson, pediatric nurse and devoted wife, was disappearing. In her place emerged someone harder, more focused, and absolutely certain about what maternal love required when faced with people who threatened children. She kissed Marcus's forehead and walked toward the door where Michael was waiting. "I've made my decision," she said quietly. "Which one?" "The one that prioritizes my children's childhood over everyone else's moral comfort." Michael nodded, understanding exactly what she was authorizing. "It'll be finished within 72 hours. "Good. And Michael?" "Yes. I want to watch." The words surprised them both, but she realized she meant them completely. If she was going to become someone who solved problems through violence, she needed to understand exactly what that meant. She needed to look into the eyes of people who'd threatened her children and watch them face the consequences of their choices. "Alicia, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. If I'm going to live with this decision, I need to own it completely." Michael studied her face, recognizing the fundamental shift that had occurred during the past hour. The woman who'd begged on her in-laws' doorstep was gone forever, replaced by someone who would do anything necessary to protect her family. 72 hours, he confirmed. 72 hours. As she returned to her children's bedside, Alicia felt something settle in her chest that was part peace and part grief. She was mourning the person she'd been while embracing the person she needed to become. Her children would grow up safe, normal, and completely unaware that their mother had become someone capable of orchestrating international assassination to protect their innocence. It was a price she was willing to pay. The only price that mattered was the one her children wouldn't have to pay themselves. The impossible choice had been made. Now came the reckoning. 71 hours after Alicia made her choice, she stood in the command center of a military facility that officially didn't exist, watching real-time surveillance feeds from 17 countries as Operation Cleanhouse dismantled the international criminal network that had threatened her family. The children were safe at a different secure location with pediatric specialists who were helping them process their trauma through play therapy and art. For the first time in weeks, Marcus had stopped sucking his thumb. Jade had started laughing again. Zoe was asking about when they could go to a real school with other children. Their healing had begun the moment they'd been removed from the constant tension of living under threat. Target 7 neutralized, reported the operations coordinator, a woman whose name Alicia would never know. Lagos compound secured, financial records recovered. On the main screen, she watched Richard Patterson being led from a luxury hotel in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. In a split screen, Margaret was being arrested simultaneously at a different location, her careful composure finally cracking as federal agents confiscated devices and documents. Primary targets in custody. Michael's voice came through the secure communication system. Financial assets frozen across all identified accounts. Network leadership decapitated. But it was the third screen that held Alicia's attention. Footage from inside what appeared to be a corporate boardroom where a dozen men in expensive suits sat around a conference table, their faces pale with shock as they processed reports of their organization being systematically destroyed. "Who are they?" she asked the operations coordinator. "The Patterson family's real employers. People who've been using American criminal networks to launder money from human trafficking, arms dealing, and drug cartels operating in regions where U.S. military intervention isn't politically feasible." The scope was staggering. Richard and Margaret hadn't just been greedy relatives. They'd been middle management in an international criminal empire that used wealthy American families as fronts for operations that funded terrorism and destabilized entire regions. How long has this been going on? According to the intelligence we've recovered, at least 15 years. The Patterson family business empire was essentially a money laundering operation disguised as legitimate investments. Alicia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the facility's air conditioning. James knew about this? Michael's voice came through the speakers with an edge she'd never heard before. "Alicia, there's something we need to tell you about your husband." The operations coordinator gestured toward a secured briefing room adjacent to the command center. "Mrs. Patterson, you'll want to sit down for this conversation." The next 20 minutes shattered everything she thought she understood about her marriage, her inheritance, and the past 6 years of her life. James Patterson wasn't just a businessman who suspected his family of financial fraud, Michael began, spreading classified documents across the briefing table. He was a deep-cover intelligence asset who'd been investigating international criminal networks for the past 8 years. The documents showed photos of James in locations she'd never known he'd visited. Meetings with foreign officials, surveillance photographs from criminal investigations, financial records linking the Patterson family to operations in countries she couldn't pronounce. "That's impossible. James was with me. We had children together. I watched him die of cancer. The cancer was real. The timeline was real. But his business trips, his family obligations, his entire relationship with his siblings, it was all part of an intelligence operation designed to penetrate and document one of the most sophisticated criminal networks ever discovered." David Chun, who'd been silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke. "Alicia, the $250 million inheritance isn't just James's personal wealth. It's asset recovery from criminal operations spanning 2 decades. You didn't just inherit money. You inherited evidence that's been used to dismantle an organization responsible for thousands of deaths worldwide." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. "I've been living off blood money. You've been living off recovered assets that are being returned to victims' families through carefully structured charitable foundations," Michael corrected. "Every dollar has been laundered clean through legitimate investments and community development projects." She thought about the houses being built for struggling families, the medical clinic for Denise Williams, the community centers that were supposed to serve underprivileged children. All of it funded by money stolen from criminal operations and returned to the communities they'd exploited. The construction projects were always part of the operation. James's community development initiatives were cover for intelligence gathering while simultaneously providing legitimate benefit to people who needed help. Another layer of deception revealing itself, but this time the deception served justice rather than greed. James hadn't just been building houses. He'd been building networks of people who could provide information about criminal activities in their neighborhoods. How much of our marriage was real? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Michael and David exchanged glances before Michael answered with careful honesty. The love was real. The children were real. The cancer and his death were real. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But the circumstances that brought you together, the timing of your relationship, even the hospital fundraiser where you met, those were arranged by intelligence professionals who needed James to have a credible personal life while conducting his investigation. Alicia felt the room spinning slightly as she processed the implications. "You're telling me I was recruited without knowing it? That my entire life has been part of an intelligence operation? You were identified as someone with the personal qualities James would need in a partner, and opportunities were created for you to meet naturally." But what happened after that meeting was entirely genuine. The distinction felt meaningless when she realized that even her love story had been orchestrated by government professionals. Every milestone of her adult life, her career, her marriage, her children, even her husband's death, had occurred within the framework of an intelligence operation she'd never suspected existed. What about the children? Are they part of this too? The children are exactly what they appear to be. You're and James's biological children, who were born into circumstances they had no control over. Michael's voice carried new gentleness. But their safety has always been the operation's primary concern. Everything that's happened, including tonight's assault and the current network dismantling, was designed to ensure they could grow up normal and safe. By turning their mother into someone complicit in international assassination? By ensuring that the people who threatened them could never threaten any other children. Through the briefing room windows, she could see the command center continuing to coordinate operations across multiple time zones. Arrests were happening in real time, assets were being frozen, and an organization that had operated with impunity for decades was being systematically destroyed. How many people are dying tonight because of my decision? Michael consulted a tablet displaying operation statistics. 47 confirmed eliminations across 17 countries. All individuals with documented involvement in crimes against American citizens or crimes against children internationally. The number should have horrified her, but Alicia found herself feeling something closer to satisfaction. 47 criminals who would never again threaten innocent families. 47 people who'd chosen to profit from violence against children and were now facing the consequences of those choices. Is it finished? The immediate network is neutralized. But intelligence operations like this create ripple effects that continue for years. Other networks will adjust their operations based on what happened tonight. Some will decide American families aren't worth the risk. Others will try to test whether tonight was an anomaly or a new standard. And if they test, then they'll discover that the United States government takes threats against children very seriously, and that wealthy Americans now have access to responses that transcend legal jurisdiction. The larger implications were becoming clear. Alicia's family crisis hadn't just been about recovering stolen inheritance. It had been about establishing precedent for how America would respond to international threats against civilian families. So my children and I were weapons in a policy demonstration? Your children were American citizens whose safety became a matter of national security. Your response to threats against them established parameters that will protect thousands of other families in similar situations. David pulled out another set of documents. Alicia, there's one more thing you need to understand about your situation. More revelations? The inheritance you received wasn't just recovered criminal assets. It also included legitimate Patterson family wealth that James accumulated through his intelligence work. You're not just wealthy, you're wealthy enough to fund similar operations independently if the need arises. The words created a silence that stretched until their implications became clear. David was telling her that she now had the resources to operate outside government oversight, to protect her family and others through methods that didn't require official authorization. You're offering me the opportunity to become a private intelligence operation? We're informing you that you already have the resources and connections to operate independently, should you choose to do so. Michael leaned forward. Alicia, what happened tonight didn't just eliminate the specific threat to your family. It demonstrated that some American citizens have access to capabilities that rival government agencies. That's a powerful deterrent, but it's also a responsibility. What kind of responsibility? The responsibility to use those capabilities wisely, and to remember that with great power comes the obligation to protect people who don't have access to the same resources. She thought about Denise Williams and her children, about Maria Santos and Robert Chin, about all the families whose dreams had been threatened by criminal greed. The money James had left her could fund protection for hundreds of such families, could build networks of security and justice that operated beyond the reach of bureaucratic limitations. There's something else, Michael continued. The Patterson family network we dismantled tonight was just one arm of a larger organization. There are other networks, other families, other criminal operations that target American citizens because they believe our legal system is too slow and our government too restricted to respond effectively. And you want me to help hunt them down? I want you to understand that you now have the power to ensure that no other mother faces the choice you faced tonight, between sacrificing her principles and protecting her children. The offer was seductive and terrifying in equal measure. Alicia could walk away from this world, take her children somewhere safe, and live quietly on legitimate investments while other families faced similar threats. Or she could accept the role James had apparently prepared for her, becoming someone who hunted monsters to protect innocents. Through the command center windows, she watched the final arrest statistics appearing on the main screen. The operation was complete. The immediate threat was eliminated. Her children were safe. But the larger war against people who profited from violence against families was just beginning. "I need to see my children," she said quietly. "I need to make sure they're really okay before I make any decisions about the future." "Of course," Michael replied. "But Alicia, there's one more thing you should know." "What now?" "James left you a message. A video recording that was supposed to be delivered only after the operation concluded successfully." David activated a secured tablet, and James's face appeared on the screen. But this wasn't the cancer-weakened man she'd watched die 3 months ago. This was the James from 2 years earlier, healthy and strong, speaking directly to a camera with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Hello, beautiful. If you're watching this, it means the operation succeeded and you're safe. It also means you've learned the truth about our life together, and you're probably feeling angry and betrayed and confused about what was real and what was manufactured." Hearing his voice again after everything she'd learned was overwhelming. Alicia felt tears she'd been holding back for hours finally beginning to fall. "The love was real, Alicia. Our children were real. My cancer was real, and my death was real. But you're right to feel manipulated, because you were manipulated, by me, by the government, by circumstances that forced impossible choices on people who deserved better." James paused, and she could see the weight of his secrets in his expression. "I'm not going to ask for forgiveness, because what I did was unforgivable. I brought you into a world of violence and deception without your consent, and I put our children at risk to serve objectives you never agreed to support. But I am going to tell you why I made those choices, and then I'm going to give you the power to make your own choices about what happens next." The recording continued for another 20 minutes, explaining the scope of the criminal networks he'd infiltrated, the children who'd been saved through intelligence gathered during their marriage, and the families who would be protected by the precedent established through her situation. But it was his final words that broke her heart completely. "You have 3 choices now, Alicia. You can take our children and disappear into a normal life, using the legitimate wealth I've provided to give them every advantage they deserve. You can work with the government to continue hunting the people who threaten families like ours. Or you can build something new, an organization that protects innocence without being constrained by political limitations or legal technicalities." James smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the man who'd sung lullabies to their babies. "Whatever you choose, know that I love you, I'm proud of you, and I trust you to be the mother our children need. Whether that's someone who protects them through anonymity or someone who protects them by ensuring that monsters learn to fear American families." The recording ended, leaving her alone with Michael and David and a choice that would determine not just her family's future, but the kind of person she would become. Outside the briefing room, the command center was beginning to power down as Operation Cleanhouse reached its conclusion. 47 criminals were dead. Hundreds of millions in criminal assets had been recovered. An international network that had operated with impunity for decades was destroyed. And Alicia Patterson, pediatric nurse turned widow turned intelligence asset, had to decide whether the person she'd become tonight was someone she could live with for the rest of her life. Looking at the statistics on the monitors, crimes prevented, children protected, families saved, she realized the choice had already been made. She'd crossed lines tonight that couldn't be uncrossed. But on the other side of those lines, her children would grow up in a world where people who threatened innocent families faced consequences that transcended legal jurisdiction. It was a price she could live with. More than that, it was a legacy she could be proud of. The climactic revelation wasn't just about discovering James's true role or the scope of the criminal network. It was about discovering who she was capable of becoming when the people she loved most needed protection that only she could provide. And that person was someone her children could grow up proud to call mother. 6 months later, Alicia stood in the lobby of the Patterson Industries building, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as construction crews put the finishing touches on the Denise Williams Community Health Center. The building would open next week, providing free medical care to families who couldn't afford it otherwise. The first of 17 such facilities being built across the city with recovered criminal assets. Marcus tugged at her hand, his small face pressed against the glass as he watched the workers install a playground designed specifically for children visiting the clinic with their parents. At 4 years old, he had no memory of the night armed men had attacked their home. The trauma therapy had worked, leaving him with only vague recollections of a time when we had to stay inside a lot. "Mommy, can we go see the slides when they're finished?" he asked, his voice carrying the normal excitement of a child anticipating fun rather than the fearful whispers she'd heard during those dark weeks. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll bring Jade and Zoe too." Her daughters were at preschool. Actual preschool with other children, not private tutors in secured facilities. They attended birthday parties, played in public parks, and complained about having to clean their rooms like perfectly normal 4-year-olds should. The nightmares had stopped months ago, replaced by dreams about unicorns and space adventures and becoming doctors like their mommy used to be. "Mrs. Patterson?" The voice belonged to Maria Santos, the young mother whose house construction had been canceled by Richard before being completed through the James Patterson Memorial Housing Initiative. She approached with her toddler balanced on her hip, both of them wearing the bright smiles of people whose lives had been transformed by unexpected generosity. "Please call me Alicia. How's the new house working out?" "It's perfect. Miguel started walking just last week, and there's so much space for him to explore safely." Maria's eyes shone with gratitude that never seemed to diminish. "I wanted you to know that the community center is already helping families even before it officially opens. Mrs. Williams has been seeing patients in the temporary space, and she's already saved 2 children who wouldn't have received care otherwise." The reports like this came regularly, updates on families whose lives had been improved by projects funded with money recovered from criminal operations. Each success story felt like vindication for the choices she'd made, proof that the transformation of blood money into community benefits could create genuine healing. "Mrs. Patterson," Marcus said, looking up at Maria with the serious expression he wore when meeting new adults, "my daddy helped build houses for families before he went to heaven. Mommy says we're continuing his work." The explanation they'd settled on was both true and innocent enough for a 4-year-old to understand. James had helped families, he'd died from sickness, and now Mommy was using the money he'd left them to help even more families. The complexity of intelligence operations and criminal networks would remain hidden until the children were old enough to understand the adult world's moral ambiguities. Maria knelt down to Marcus's eye level. "Your daddy was a very good man. The house he helped build for my family is the best home we've ever had." As Maria left with her son, Alicia felt the familiar mixture of pride and melancholy that came with these encounters. James's legacy was creating genuine good in the world, but the cost of that legacy had been higher than anyone should have to pay. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from Michael. "Meeting confirmed for tonight. The Seattle situation requires attention." The Seattle situation. Another wealthy American family being targeted by international criminals who thought legal jurisdiction made them untouchable. Another mother facing the choice between surrendering to extortion or watching her children live under constant threat. Another opportunity to demonstrate that some American families now had access to responses that transcended conventional law enforcement. The organization she'd built over the past 6 months operated through carefully structured charitable foundations and security consulting firms, all legitimate on the surface, all connected to networks that could implement solutions when legal approaches proved insufficient. 23 families had been protected so far, their situations resolved through methods that left no evidence and required no congressional oversight. "Mommy, are you going to work tonight?" Marcus asked, demonstrating the intuitive perception children develop when their parents carry hidden responsibilities. "Just a quick meeting, baby. Aunt Sarah will stay with you and the girls." Sarah Chun, David's sister and a former pediatric nurse herself, had become the children's favorite babysitter and Alicia's most trusted confidant. She was one of the few people who knew the full scope of what the James Patterson Memorial Foundation actually did, and she'd become essential to maintaining the normal family life that kept the children grounded and happy. Will Uncle Michael be there? The question still created complex emotions 6 months after learning his true identity. Captain Michael Torres had officially retired from military service to become Director of Operations for the Foundation, a role that allowed their relationship to develop on genuine rather than strategic grounds. The transition hadn't been smooth. Learning that their entire relationship had begun as part of an intelligence operation had required months of careful rebuilding, honest conversations about what was real versus what was manufactured, an acceptance that some deceptions had been necessary to protect national security, while others had simply been necessary to protect her heart. But watching him with her children, reading bedtime stories with the patience of someone who genuinely loved them, teaching Marcus to throw a baseball with the care of a man who understood the precious nature of normal childhood moments, had convinced her that whatever their relationship had begun as, it had evolved into something authentic and lasting. Yes, Uncle Michael will be there. Good. I like Uncle Michael. He makes you smile the way Daddy used to. The observation was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Marcus was too young to understand the complexity of adult relationships, but old enough to recognize that his mother was happy in ways she hadn't been since his father's death. Let's go home, sweetie. We need to pick up your sisters from school. The drive home took them through neighborhoods where James Patterson Memorial Projects were creating visible improvements, new community centers, renovated playgrounds, small businesses supported by microloans that would never be traced to criminal asset recovery. The money stolen from victims around the world was being returned to communities that needed it, creating cycles of positive change that would continue for generations. Their house, a comfortable but not ostentatious home in a family-friendly neighborhood, was protected by security that was invisible but comprehensive. No armed guards or bulletproof windows, just technology and personnel that ensured threats were identified and neutralized long before they could reach her family. The children ran ahead to the backyard where Michael was assembling a swing set that had been delivered that morning, his military precision applied to civilian engineering challenges that made her daughters giggle with anticipation. "How was your day?" he asked, looking up from instruction manual that apparently required the kind of tactical planning he'd once applied to international operations. "Productive. The Williams Clinic is ahead of schedule, and Maria Santos says Miguel took his first steps in their new house." Good. Michael's satisfaction with such reports was genuine. The man who'd once hunted international criminals now found equal purpose in ensuring families had safe homes and accessible health care. "The Seattle briefing is ready when you are. After dinner. I want to hear about their day first." It was a boundary she'd established early in their new life. Family time remained sacred, protected from the darker responsibilities that paid for their security and comfort. Whatever operations needed planning, whatever threats required response, it all waited until after homework was finished and bedtime stories were read. Jade and Zoe burst through the back door with the energy of children who'd spent the day learning and playing with friends, their backpacks scattered as they rushed to examine the swing set progress. "Uncle Michael, can we help?" Jade asked, already reaching for tools that were probably too advanced for 4-year-old hands. "You can be my supervisors," he replied solemnly. "Supervisors are very important. They make sure everything is built safely." Watching him with her daughters, patient, gentle, completely focused on their happiness, Alicia felt the familiar gratitude for the unexpected gifts that had emerged from traumatic circumstances. The man she'd fallen in love with under deceptive circumstances had proven to be exactly who she'd hoped he was, just with more complex professional background than she'd originally understood. "Alicia," he said quietly while the children debated swing placement with the seriousness of professional consultants, "there's something about the Seattle situation you should know before tonight's briefing." "What?" "The family being targeted. They're connected to the original Patterson network. This isn't random criminal selection. Someone's testing whether what happened to Richard and Margaret was an anomaly or a new standard for American responses." The information sent ice through her veins, but not from fear. Someone was challenging the precedent her family had established, treating her response to the Patterson family's crimes as an invitation to probe American resolve rather than a warning to avoid American targets. "Good," she said, surprising herself with the calm determination in her voice. "Let them test. The answer they receive will ensure other criminals understand that targeting American families isn't a sustainable business model." Michael studied her expression, recognizing the complete transformation that had occurred since the night she'd begged on her in-laws' doorstep. The woman who'd once been thrown into the rain with her children had become someone who hunted the people who threw families into the rain. "No regrets?" he asked. "About protecting my children and other people's children from international criminals?" "None whatsoever." "About the person you've become?" The question required honest reflection. 6 months ago, she'd been a pediatric nurse whose greatest moral challenge was whether to report colleagues who cut corners on patient care. Today she was someone who coordinated international operations that resulted in criminals disappearing permanently. The transformation was complete and irreversible. But watching her children play safely in their backyard, knowing that 17 other families were sleeping peacefully because threats against them had been eliminated, understanding that her choices had created precedent that would protect thousands of future families, she felt no ambiguity about the price of that transformation. "I became who my children needed me to become," she said simply. "I became who other mothers need me to be when their children are threatened by people who think money makes them untouchable." Michael nodded, understanding that her response answered questions about both their future together and the future of the organization they'd built. The Seattle family, they have 3 children. Twin boys who are 5 and a daughter who's 7. "Then we'd better make sure those children don't spend tonight afraid of bad people who think they can profit from hurting families." As the sun set behind the swing set where her children played, Alicia felt the weight and satisfaction of choices that had led from desperate grief to purposeful power. The inheritance James had left her hadn't just provided financial security. It had provided the resources to ensure that criminal networks understood the consequences of targeting American families. The pediatric nurse who'd married James Patterson 6 years ago was gone forever. In her place stood someone who'd chosen love over law, protection over procedure, and results over rhetoric when faced with people who threatened children. It was a transformation she could live with. More than that, it was a legacy her children could be proud of when they were old enough to understand that some monsters could only be stopped by people willing to become something more dangerous than the monsters themselves. "Mommy," Marcus called from the swing set, "come push us." As she walked toward her children's laughter, Alicia thought about the woman who'd sat in the rain 6 months ago, broken and helpless while relatives stole her baby's future. That woman would never have imagined becoming someone who hunted international criminals. But that woman also would never have imagined the depth of love required to transform grief into justice, vulnerability into strength, and victimhood into the power to protect other families from similar trauma. The circle was complete. The war was won. And somewhere across the country, another mother facing impossible choices would soon discover that she wasn't as alone as she thought, that some American families now had access to protection that transcended legal limitations and political constraints. The James Patterson Memorial Foundation would ensure that the precedent established through one family's suffering became hope for all families facing similar threats. Justice had evolved beyond courtrooms and congressional oversight, and Alicia Patterson, former victim turned protector, would ensure it remained both swift and certain for anyone who thought American children were acceptable targets for international criminal enterprises. The transformation was complete. The mission was just beginning. What did this story teach you about the lengths a mother will go to protect her children, and the price of justice when legal systems fail to protect the innocent? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world. Some battles can only be won by people willing to transform themselves into whatever their loved ones need them to become.